Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to call to order this meeting of the Arlington ISD Board of Trustees on November the 19th, 2020 at 5:05 p.m. Due to health and safety concerns related to the COVID-19 coronavirus, this meeting will be conducted by video conference or telephone call. At least a quorum of the board will be participating in person, by video conference or telephone conference in accordance with the provisions of Section 551.125 or 551.127 of the Texas Government Code that have been suspended by order of the governor. All or some trustees and limited staff may be together while maintaining proper social distancing at room 301A in the McBurn Professional Development Center. Due to ongoing safety concerns, all open meeting proceedings will be live broadcast, but members of the public will be limited to the McBurn Professional Development Center pursuant to state guidelines and regulations, and all persons will be required to comply with the state and district guidelines and regulations. Members of the public may access this meeting via AISD website at www.aisd.net. The Board of Trustees on November 19th, beginning at 5:07 p.m., will convene in closed session pursuant to Sections 551.071 through 551.084 of the Texas Government Code in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act for the topics set forth in our agenda. We will reconvene in open meeting at approximately 6:30. Thank you. At this time, I will reconvene into open session this meeting of the Arlington Independent School District Board of Trustees for November 19th, 2020, beginning at 7:15 p.m. We will start our meeting with the open ceremony. Please join Justin Chapa in leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We ask that everyone please silence their phones if they're present and electronic devices to avoid disruptions to those around you. If you are speaking, ask that you make sure that you do the same. Now, if you would all please join me in a moment of silence. Okay. So the first item on our agenda this evening is our Student Leadership Advisory Board introduction. Mr. Bowie Hogg and Area Superintendent Dr. Buell have been working together with the students, and tonight they're going to share some information regarding the program and introduce our students. So, Mr. Hogg, please.
Thank you, President Mays, and to the board. This is a different year, like a lot of things, for our Student Leadership Advisory Board. But we have some outstanding students. I think this is our 8th or 9th year that we've been doing this, and this all stems on a way for us as a board to have direct contacts with young student leaders and receive feedback and have conversations with them and work to make the district better with a lot of student input. It's very powerful to all of us as we go through this. As we know, for anyone listening that doesn't know, these students are the junior class presidents of their high schools. We've added early college high schools in there, so we've expanded from where it is, but each of us will be assigned at least one SLAB student. We get paired up with these young men and women leaders, and they help guide us through. In the past, we've done things historically of shadowing at schools. We're going to do some of the same things this year and some different things this year, and the good thing is we can find new ways to do it. Dr. Buell has done a great job from a staff perspective, helping guide this, and we had an amazing call with these young men and women to see where they're going. And so we have our junior class presidents, and then we also have our SLAB student who was SLAB last year, and now she's the president of SLAB as a senior, Miss Ezzy Perez. And so can all the SLAB, everyone wave. Hi, SLAB students. Hey, and thank you guys. Sorry we had a longer executive session, so we know you've been on hold for just a little bit, but we're proud to have you here tonight and introduce, and let me throw it over to I think Dr. Buell's on there, and see if she has any words, and then we'll throw it over to Ms. Perez and have these young men and women introduce themselves. Maybe we have a Dr. Buell. If not, I'll throw it over to Izzy. I see you over there on the left corner. Izzy, go ahead, and you know all of us as you've worked with us in the past. Izzy, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll let Dr. Buell say a few words, and then we'll have each of the SLAB students start introducing themselves.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm Izzy Perez. I am a senior at Arlington High School, and I'm currently the Student Leadership Advisory Board President for 2020-2021 year. I was a member of SLAB last year, and I was given amazing opportunities to gain knowledge about AISD, and I was able to give a student insight to the district. I was also able to build relationships with the junior class presidents and the Board of Trustees. I know that this year might look a little different and we might need to make adjustments to this council, but I am thrilled to continue to work with the trustees and our new SLAB members. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm excited to join you guys tonight.
Thank you, Izzy. And Izzy, you may have said it and I may have just missed it. What high school do you go to currently?
Arlington High School.
Awesome. Thank you. Proud to see you. Always glad to see you back again. Dr. Buell, you want to say a few words, and then we'll let the other students start introducing themselves?
Yes, thank you very much. I am so excited to introduce our new SLAB members for this year, and they're going to have the opportunity to meet their board members tonight. They're very excited about that. These are our junior class presidents from each of our comprehensive high schools and great leaders on our campus. So it's a great honor to be able to work with them this year, and we're so excited to lean into their input and their experiences as they help guide our leadership, even working with our board members in the district. So thank you very much, Trustee Hogg.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Buell. Izzy, I don't know. I'll let you introduce and tell who goes next, or we can just let them start going. Izzy, you're the president of this thing. Take over, and let's have each one introduce themselves.
Yes, sir. Okay, so I personally know Julia from Arlington High School, so if she wants to go first, then that sounds good.
Hi, my name is Julia, and I'm a junior at Arlington High School, and I'm a former Bailey Ram. I've served in student council since my freshman year, and I've served as my class president for my sophomore and junior years, and I also serve as our student body secretary this year. I'm also a student athlete, and I am in track and golf, and I'm also a member of National Honor Society, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. Tyler, do you want to go next?
Sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Tyler Brown. I'm the junior class president at Bowie High School. And a little bit about myself is that I'm an IB candidate and I'm in NHS, and I'm also the captain of our Lady Vols track and field team.
Tyler, pick the next one you want to go next.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm honored to be a part of the Student Leadership Advisory Board. My name is William McPhail Jr., and I'm the junior class president for Arlington Collegiate High School. I'm also part of the Youth Leadership Arlington program, and I play basketball in my free time. I used to go to Workman, and I'm looking forward to working with Polly Walton for the rest of this year. Thank you.
And William, you get to pick the next one.
Yeah. Karina, yeah.
Hello guys, my name is Karina Laureles. I'm currently a junior at Lamar High School. This is my first year serving as class president. I am also a part of Key Club, Future Business Leaders of America, part of Lamar, and I'm really excited to start working with everybody and make new connections. So I'll pass it over to Veronica.
Hi everyone, my name is Veronica Rocha, and I'm the junior class president for Sam Houston High School. I'm an IB diploma student. I'm in NHS and Key Club, and I'm in Texan drill team. I'm a social officer for Texan, and yeah, I think the last one. I don't know how to say your name. I'm sorry. I don't want to say it wrong.
Hi, I'm Radena Fatul. I'm the junior class president for Once Again High School. I've been a part of Stuco and Key Club and HOSA since my freshman year, and I've been the class president for my class since freshman year as well.
Outstanding, and I think we got it all. And listen, these SLAB, the other value of SLAB, these young men and women go to different schools, and they are now getting to know each other. So over the year, we've seen many SLAB students develop strong friendships, and a great way to foster leadership within this district with young elected officials and maybe some old elected officials up here as the group of us. So I appreciate SLAB, and let me just go through and I will ask who is paired, and William, I know, announced, because each SLAB student is truly randomly chosen. There's a random indicator and they choose, and each SLAB student is paired with a board member. So I will ask on this group who you're paired with. And William, you said it, but would you say it again? William, who are you paired with?
Yes, I'm paired with Polly Walton.
Outstanding. And there's Miss Walton. Izzy, I know you're paired with, but go right ahead and please say who you're paired with as the president.
Yes, I am paired with the president. Is she on here today?
There's Miss Mays.
Yes, Miss Mays.
Hi, Izzy.
And Miss Laswell, please, who are you paired with?
I am paired with Justin Chapa.
Thank you. And Tyler, who are you paired with this year?
I was also paired with Mrs. Mays.
Outstanding. That's a troublemaker group, those three over there. I see it. Miss Brown, Miss Perez, and Miss Mays. Radina, who are you paired with?
I'm paired with David Wilbanks.
Outstanding. And Veronica, who is your board member?
I'm paired with Ms. Carmen Todd.
Awesome. And Karina, who are you paired with?
I'm also paired with Miss Carmen Todd.
Nope, Carmen Todd is one of our, sorry, I wasn't listening. Okay, so Ms. Buell, can you help out who?
Yes,
The pairings, I don't have
thank
the
you.
list in front of me, sorry.
Veronica is paired with Melody Fowler, Trustee Fowler. And
Perfect.
Karina
I think Karina's.
is paired with Bowie Hogg.
I thought so. Karina drew the
And-
short stick. I'm kidding, Karina. You're going to do great.
And Rudana was paired with David Wilbanks.
Awesome.
Did I get everyone?
I
All right.
think we may be missing one with Miss Buell, but we'll send the list out and we'll show
Okay.
who's this. We do have all the students' contact information. We are asking all the students and each board member to set up. Miss Benjamin will help set up a Zoom and help you guys talk through and have an introduction. Usually we see you at a dinner meeting and we can make the introductions that way and start the relationship, but we will be doing it via some virtual meetings from this. So I thank all the students. I thank Dr. Buell. We look forward to a great year. It may be a different year, but sometimes with different can come great things. So I appreciate the leadership and I appreciate the board for constantly working on engagement with our students.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Hogg, and thank you to Dr. Buell for working with our SLAB students. SLAB students, thank y'all so much for taking time out and waiting for us, and we're so happy to see your faces. And like Mr. Hogg said, it's a different year for the way that we'll do things, but there's no difference in how y'all have been selected as our SLAB students, your leadership position, and we're so excited for whatever we get to do with y'all this year. So thank y'all very much. Okay, next on our agenda is our open forum for agenda items. As stated on the posted agenda, members of the public who desire to address the board regarding an item on this agenda are required to register by sending an email to the Superintendent of Schools Secretary, lbenjami@aisd.net, no later than 3 p.m. the day of the board meeting. Mrs. Benjamin, do we have any requesters registered to address the board regarding agenda items this evening?
Yes, ma'am, we have 3. We have Emma Cornier, Reba Guthrie, and Jack McCall.
Okay. So as we are preparing to upload them to be able to speak, I'm going to read that this is a routine part of the school board's agenda for regularly scheduled meetings. This segment of the meeting provides citizens with an opportunity to share their views with the trustees on items that are on the agenda tonight. It is not intended to be a discussion or a debate, and trustees will not reply to the speakers. Derogatory comments aimed at an individual will not be tolerated. Personnel matters are not appropriate subjects for open forum. You will have 5 minutes to speak. Mrs. Benjamin will notify you when your time is up, and please at that time end your presentation. So, Frank, do we have Emma Corroyer? No. Okay. Do we have Ms. Guthrie? Okay. Ms. Guthrie, if you can hear me and if you're there, you may start speaking now.
Yes, this is Ms. Guthrie.
Hi, Ms.
Can
Guthrie.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the board on Mrs. Ridgeway, Coach Ridgeway, Teacher Ridgeway's behalf. I have worked and subbed for her at Seguin High School for over 10 years. And during the 10 years, Coach Ridgeway, she is a great coach and a great teacher. She listens to her students and they respect her. Her lesson plans are organized, clear and concise. She sets goals for her students, and most importantly, she gives a detailed plan on how to achieve their goals. She opens up her arms to all her students, regardless of race or gender. She's a compassionate teacher. I recall some years ago when it was Coach Hasper, Coach Lynn, Coach Murphy. There were several students who they were in need of a coach, just essentials, food at home, radio wide. It didn't matter if they were on the football team or if they were on the soccer team or if they were on track. What I saw in those coaches and the kids saw, it was compassion, unity, and they got it done. I thought that was awesome. It was a unified front. And I just really respect all of those coaches when they did that. And also, I would like to say, Coach Ridgeway was created to teach and to coach. I don't know if she discovered her talent when she went to school and a teacher impressed on her, or a coach impressed on her, and she wanted to be a coach and a teacher. But I know her gift. She was created to teach and to coach. And at Seguin, she released her gift to her students, who have, some of them have impacted the world. I also remember my time there happened year after year. They would have like a little potluck for Thanksgiving. And the students would get so excited and say, Miss G, I brought this. We're going to have a potluck. Even after some of them graduated, they would come looking for her. Not only young women, men. Miss G, have you seen Coach Ridgeway? We just wanted to stop by to see her. Kids, you and I know that when they do that, they feel loved. She treated them like they were her children. She knows she's a visionary. She knows how to inspire, stimulate, motivate, influence, and encourage each of her students. She has a fiery spirit. She's always on the move. And I noticed her when she had her track meetings, how excited the kids would get. You know, they wanted to get everything together, get ready to move out, because they knew when she was ready to move and their time to move the league, they were ready and excited about what the accomplishments and the hard work that they had done prior to their meets. And, you know, I consider it an honor to know her as an educator and to have worked with her and her husband. What an awesome unity. When I think about her, I remember, I think it was Mandela who said, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the lives we lead. And a poet once said, and I may have told her this, but her mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive. She thrives as a teacher, she thrives as a coach, you guys know that, and to do so with some passion, with some compassion, some humor, and some style. And I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity, the board, to just address the board on her behalf. And I consider it an awesome honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Guthrie. Next, we have Mr. McCall. Mr. McCall, can you hear me?
Yes, this is Jack McCall. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Your time may start now.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to the board tonight. I am the spouse of one of your high school teachers. And my wife, you know, she absolutely loves teaching. It's what she's called, it's a calling for her. But this year has become very challenging, and I'm sure it's for a lot of teachers. And so these are just some of the observations that I've seen that's happening with teachers. You know, it's just the workload, all the little different things get passed down to these teachers and stuff. The workload has become just over, it's become tremendous. I've seen my wife where she will go through, and in previous years, you know, it was nothing for her to be working till 8, 9, 10 o'clock, you know, making sure the grades are done, making sure the classes are ready for the next day, you know, and she gets to the school early in the morning. But folks, this year, it's nothing to see her on the computer because her computer's in our bedroom. It's nothing to see her on our computer 10, 11, 12, 1 a.m. trying to fill all these requirements. And they keep putting more and more down there. The other thing I wanted to ask about is we see the large rise in numbers that are happening now. And what is being done for your high-risk teachers? Do you have teachers in your schools that are high risk? There is a form that they were given that they could go through and fill out requesting for telework due to COVID-19. And, are there teachers actually being allowed to do that? I know in my wife's case, she has type 2 diabetes and she has psoriatic arthritis, and one of her medications depletes her immune system. I helped her fill the paperwork out, and it was denied. And that's including a letter from her doctor. So what is being done for your high-risk teachers with these numbers that are climbing? The other thing is that, unfortunately, I get to hear a lot of conversations because it's in our bedroom now. I hear conversations with other teachers and they get 2, 3 kids show up in a class, maybe 5 or 6 show up on a Zoom, and just multitudes of students that have not even signed in. The workload that's being put onto these teachers to try the many different ways and times to get the students to get in there and do what they need to do, it has just become a very huge burden. And you're wearing them out. My wife is starting to get sick easily just from minor illness and stuff, just because of the level of stress that is being pushed down to them now. So I ask, what is it you're doing for your teachers? They're the backbone for these kids. What is being put in place to support these teachers? Those were my list of questions there, and I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Frank, did we have Miss Emma?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Ms. Coroyer, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, can you hear me?
Hello, good evening. I can hear you.
Hi, okay, your 5 minutes starts now.
Okay. I just wanted to touch on a few things. I've heard a bunch of different things about, the schools closing back down again. I've already read about the TEA announcing today about possibly closing after Thanksgiving or allowing that if the cases rise. My concern is just that I feel so many students, one being my child who is in elementary, their education has tremendously suffered because of this. And I know it's unprecedented times and not everybody can have a happy solution from everything, but I feel like what everyone's purpose here for, whether you're a teacher or whether you're on the, the board of trustees, whether you're a student, is for the students to learn. That is what everything that's being discussed, the sole purpose is for the students. And I just feel like the schools shutting down, them being online is just doing them a horrible service for their education, for their future years to come. My mom is also an AISD teacher, and we have the same views. She feels students aren't learning from home. And I'm more concerned, obviously, with my own child who, she's in kindergarten. And in kindergarten, you start to learn how to read, to write. You start basic math. And when she was online, they had a 30-minute Zoom session in the morning and a 30-minute Zoom session at lunch, which I don't think an hour of Zoom activity with 5-year-old children who can't sit still and focus on a computer is really learning anything. Therefore, why are they in school when they're not learning anything? And I just feel like even for children so young, that's crucial learning, that they have to take all of those things with them as they get older, as they continue through education. Those are basic skills. And if they're not able to learn that, then what are we here for? What are teachers here for? Why are parents putting kids in school? And why is there a board if that's not the sole purpose of teaching students and them to learn and grow and succeed in life isn't gonna happen. I know COVID is concerning, and I work in the medical field, so I understand how scary it can be. But at the same time, I've been following the AISD cases, and I realized that it's actually pretty, in my opinion, small. AISD is the 13th largest school district in Texas, and with roughly almost 60,000 students, there's right now active cases less than 1%, actually less than 0.5%, which is crazy how small that is considering how many students there are. And with the staff, there's roughly 4,100 teachers, cases 67, all of that's posted. So that's 1.6%. I mean, these are small numbers. So for every school to just shut down, I just think it's not necessary. I think every independent school district should be evaluated differently based on their amount of cases, just to better benefit the children. So basically, I'm just speaking on behalf of that. I know so many students who want to be in school or can't, and I have colleagues that have, high school children that they're just not learning because they're not logging in. They're not in a learning environment. They're home alone because parents have to work, and they're just not doing the work. They're not motivated to learn. And I'm sure if I had access to the numbers and the grades, there'd be a decline across the board. I just feel like nobody is benefiting from virtual learning. Although if you want to have the choice to do online or in person, I feel like that's great because you can choose what's important for your family, whether it's health at the top of everything or education. I'm personally more terrified of my child not being able to learn and this impact the rest of her life as she continues her education, since we don't know how long this is going to go on, than her getting sick and bringing it home to me. Because I just feel like at this point, it's not bad enough where she doesn't need to go to school. I feel like the schools have done a really good job with their processes in the morning of checking temperatures and doing the questionnaire. I do my part as a parent to, monitor her symptoms, if she has any, how she's feeling, check her temperature when she gets home. I mean, as everyone should be doing, of course. So I just wanted to really voice my opinion on that. Is that it?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Your time is over.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Courier. Okay, next on our agenda are action items. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays. And tonight we bring our action item to consider the 2020-2021 campus performance objectives and our district scorecard. So this is an opportunity for the board to review the campus performance objectives, our district scorecard. This is a continuation of a process. As you recall, the board adopted the literacy goals and the math goals earlier this semester. So this continues to flow into our campus planning process. At this time, I'll ask Dr. Stephen Wertz, our Chief Academic Officer, to lead us through the presentation.
Good evening, President Mays, members of the board, Dr. Cavazos. Thank you for allowing us to be here this evening to share with you a continuation of our discussion at the previous board meeting in October, which we shared district improvement plan and House Bill 3 goals and performance objectives. And as Dr. Cavazos mentioned this evening, we will be sharing information specifically around the process that campuses have engaged in to develop their improvement plans and the overall district scorecard goals and objectives. Tonight I'm accompanied by Dr. Kevin Barlow, our Assistant Superintendent for Research and Accountability, and we'll co-present. I'll go over the process at the front part of the presentation around campus improvement planning, and then Dr. Barlow will share information about some updates around the accountability system in the state of Texas and the scorecard itself before we present it for your approval. Let's see if I can. All right, so the first thing we wanted to do is just emphasize what the purpose of the campus improvement planning process is, and the school improvement process in general, which is really about guiding staff at both the campus and district level to really go about a systematic improvement for student performance of all student subgroups that we serve in the district. And we are working towards students gaining mastery around state standards that are indicated within the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Our goal is to align our improvement process in each of our areas of the district by starting with the goal and also the performance objectives that are outlined in the strategic plan that was developed and adopted by the school board. And then from that place, each year we identify specific areas in the district improvement planning process that target goals that allow us to look at the whole system to ensure students across all of our student subgroups and schools are engaged in specific processes that will help the whole system grow together. And then from that district improvement planning process, we develop a district scorecard, which in essence allows us to elevate specific overarching large goals that we'll be keeping our eyes on over the course of the year as we work towards our targets. And then finally, campus improvement plans. And campus improvement plans are really more of the trickle-down effect of what starts at the district improvement planning process. And it's really a kind of a symbiotic relationship. The district improvement plan articulates the overarching system-wide goals, and then what campuses do is they go through a process that allow them to identify what their campus areas of improvement are, and then leverage the processes that are being implemented at the district level to impact those goals. In our strategic plan, we have one goal. 100% of our students will graduate exceptionally prepared for college, career, and citizenship. And this is a unique goal. And most times when people examine goals that are adopted by a school board, there's usually several. As you know, you adopted one goal that 100% of our students graduate exceptionally prepared. And for us, this is an equity question, a goal of equity, which really allows us to really identify what the needs of individual students are across our schools and to find ways to allow them to find success at mastering content at the same level as their peer groups. And so this group of 100% constantly allows us as educators to strive towards making sure each student has those opportunities provided to them. When we say exceptionally prepared, as a reminder, we are working towards three things. Of course, a high school diploma that articulates a mastery level around specific content areas, and or a certification in the workforce, which allows you to engage in the workforce, acquiring a job that has a livable salary. But we believe that the process of doing that in the elementary and secondary classroom is really to develop skills that you can leverage in any part of your life, and we call these life-ready skills. And so it's almost as if the content that you learn in the classroom and the experiences that you have in your career tech courses allow you to gain skills such as growth mindset, collaboration, learning how to develop professional ethics, learning how to be an autonomous self-starter, communicating with others and to leverage your creativity. All of these things are life skills that you will be allowed to implement in any aspect of your life, regardless of what your path is. And so our goal is to make sure that our students, when they walk the stage at the time of graduation, they not only have the certificates in hand, but these life-ready skills ready to implement them in any whatever path of life they choose. When it comes to our district improvement plan and our strategic plan, there are four overarching goals. One pertains to academic achievement, one's around college readiness, one's around workforce readiness, and one's around leadership, citizenship, and responsibility. And when you look at the district improvement plan, you will notice that we have implemented specific performance objectives around the goals where there are activities within the strategic plan for that year. This upcoming year, we're focused specifically around academic achievement, college readiness, and workforce readiness. Of course, we're going to continue to work on leadership, citizenship, and responsibility, and we have a whole swath of work that we're doing with leadership pathway development that is happening, even though it's not necessarily articulated in an improvement plan for the district. These are the goals and the performance objectives that were adopted in an October meeting. Specifically, performance objective 1 is focused around reading, and performance objective 2 is around mathematics. And then we have performance objectives in goals 2 and 3, which are really focused around increasing student performance in college, career, and military readiness indicators. These goals, as they were adopted, also have House Bill 3, third grade STAR performance goals in reading and math embedded in them. And these will all be, once we finish this process, this evening. We will, if the goals and everything are approved for the scorecard, we will then be ready to be posting these things on the website for the public to view. The campus and planning process has 6 specific steps, and just to orient everybody to what those steps are, they're very similar to the district improvement planning process, except for they take place at a smaller scale, meaning at each of the individual campuses. The way that it works is our Department of Research and Accountability, led by Dr. Barlow, provides training support to campus leaders and their leadership teams around how to develop a campus plan that's directly aligned to the district improvement plan. And one of our main focus areas that we spend a lot of time on specifically is really around this continuous improvement process and how to make sure that we identify root cause, as I mentioned in the October meeting, what the actual symptoms are, identify what we believe the intervention or process is that we want to implement that will allow us to impact the outcome we're looking for, and then to measure the implementation of that process and its impact over the course of the school year. So as campuses go through that process, they develop their plan with their SBDMs or their site-based decision-making committees. They receive feedback and support from their area superintendents along the way, and they start this process by conducting this comprehensive needs assessment. Once they actually start to develop their plan, their SBDM will then work with them to refine their plan, and then their area superintendents and the Office of Research and Accountability will review their CIPs, provide feedback, and then finally they're finalized and published, which have been made available to you online for your review Monday evening. One important part of the campus process is the Effective Schools Framework. And just to orient everyone, the Effective Schools Framework is really designed to provide a clear vision for what schools across the state should do to ensure that excellent educational opportunities are provided to students. And at the core of the Effective Schools Framework is instruction, and this instructional core is strengthened by effective, well-supported teachers, a high-quality curriculum, and positive school culture. And school leadership and careful planning is, you'll notice on the outside of the framework, which encompasses and ensures that each of the levers are done effectively. The Effective Schools Framework functions very much in a continuous improvement process, and there are 5 levers attached to the Effective Schools Framework. Each lever includes district commitments, it includes essential actions, it includes foundational essential actions. So each specific lever has one foundational essential action that schools are recommended to address first if they're just starting that as part of their continuous improvement effort. And then of course there are key practices which include a set of defined essential actions that they can implement to improve their outcomes at their schools. As you can see on the screen, there are 5 specific levers: strong school leadership and planning, effective and well-supported teachers, positive school culture, a high-quality curriculum and effective instruction. And each school in Arlington ISD goes through a process of evaluating their school against these levers, and they identify which levers they want to place in their campus improvement plan that they believe will have the greatest impact on the outcomes their students are experiencing. If someone was to read a campus improvement plan, there is a direct line between how it's created and what it looks like on paper and the specific processes that we're trying to accomplish as a system. So the first thing is the performance objective, and this is the outcome we're trying to impact when it comes to student learning. The second area is the strategy. Another way of putting that is the specific process that we intend to implement, that we want to use to impact or to create the outcome that we're looking for in students. And then finally, process measures. And these are the specific ways that we intend to measure the implementation of the strategy and the impact the strategy is having on the outcome. And this process happens, as you can see on the far right, through formative reviews, 4 times over the course of the year. So each quarter we do an update. The campuses will review their plan, and we will review our plan at the district level. And we look at each of the strategies we're implementing and the process measures that we have been taking over the course of that quarter to decide if progress is being made towards the outcome we're looking for, if we need to modify or adjust that strategy, if it's been accomplished, or if we feel like the strategy is not a good one and we should discontinue it and find another. So that's the process that we went through. What I'd like to do is turn some time over to Dr. Barlow, who will share a little bit about the accountability process in the state of Texas and some updates that we've been receiving and some questions that we think are important for everyone to think about. This is an important topic, the accountability in relationship to CIPs and DIPs, because the goals or the performance objectives that are in each of those two plans are directly connected to state accountability system or STAR outcomes. And so I'm going to turn some time over to Dr. Barlow, and he's going to share some information about the accountability system. Dr. Barlow?
Sure, thank you, and good evening, President Mays, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos. So I just have a few slides here. It's kind of an eclectic group of concepts with respect to accountability. As you know, I serve on the ATAC committee with TEA, and each time we meet, we talk about different aspects of accountability and/or if there needs to be any changes. That's just under normal times. During COVID times, it's even more diverse. And so really what I've done is I've just taken a few concepts from our last meeting that we discussed with respect to what might affect accountability this coming year. And we'll just cover a couple of those bullets. We won't spend a lot of time on them. It's just to kind of give you a flavor of some of those conversations. And so the first piece here is the CCMR. We're very familiar with that concept. However, this gets a little bit challenging in that without any or very much 2020 data for our graduates of 2020, that becomes a little bit challenging as far as how do you actually calculate that? Is it going to be comparable to previous years and so forth? So we've had this discussion numerous times internally and then also with ATAC, with DEA. And where they're leaning right now is that you would get the better of 2019 or 2020 CCMR scores. That has some benefits. It's almost like a safe harbor type of thing in that the 2019, if that's our better score, then it wouldn't go down any. Or if 2020 is our better score, well, then we'd gain a little bit of advantage there. Another piece there is that goes into that 2019 score is that they're changing the rules a little bit, quite a bit, on the military indicator code. And if you fall under the 2020, military code would be calculated one way, but if we went with the 2019 scores, we would still continue with the way we had military codes back in 2019. That's actually an advantage for us. We think that when they tighten the requirements on military code, we may actually have some challenges there with the 2020. So that would actually help us. The other piece there that I just want to mention is that there's two ways they calculate the CCMR component. And one of them is an overall score and one of them is by student group. They really focus right here on the overall score with respect to the better of the two. It would get too complicated to do it by student group. We'll go to the next slide, please. So another piece of this is the growth models. We've talked several times over the last several years since we've been under this new system about growth. And some challenges there. We don't have spring of 2020 scores. So how do we calculate a growth indicator or a growth measure? So the typical way we do that is if under normal times, we would have 2021 scores in the spring, and then we would have 2020 scores from last spring. You subtract the two, student by student, go through a process, and then you come up with a growth measure there. Well, obviously, we can't do that. So the talk right now is that we would use a two-year model where we would actually go back to 2018. So you would actually look at students 2021 scores, go back to 2019, and then do a two-year growth model and then run that through the matrix that they're using for the one-year growth model. Now, that has some challenges, two challenges there that we expressed very adamantly in our ATAC meeting with TEA was, one of those is with the two-year model, you would also have students coming in from other districts that you didn't have a year with them. In other words, under a one-year model, you typically have that student for the year. You could have a student that was in one district 1 year, another district another year. That student would still go into your calculation. So that's problematic with respect to a two-year model. Another piece there is that the matrix that they use to actually do those determinations or do the calculations with, they're still using the one-year growth model for that, which we have concerns about that. One other piece that doesn't affect us quite as much, but it does indirectly, is you'll see where you have those K-4 campuses. So obviously, if under normal times, third graders, it's difficult to have a growth score because they didn't have STAR scores as a second grader. But now, as a fourth grader, you would not have STAR scores either because you go back to 2 years to second grade. So if you have a K-4 campus, then those K-4 campuses would not have any growth measures at all. We don't have K-4 campuses here, but there are a lot of districts that do. I used to be in a district that we had several K-4 campuses. So when you start trying to compare elementary schools, those are not going to be equitable anymore because our campuses would not be equitable in comparison to a district that has K-4 campuses. Next slide, please. I think I covered that first bullet there. Yeah, the second bullet, we're good there. So let's go to the next slide. I did want to focus on this slide just for a minute. Now, these are fictitious data, but I wanted to demonstrate this process. This is actually a good thing, although I don't know that the adjustments will be as much as what we want. But the typical way that this works with respect to actually assigning the letter grade. So let's concentrate on the third column from the left, where it says letter grade A, B, C, D, F. Then go to the column to the very column to the left of that, where it says scale score 90, 80, 70, 60, and then less than 60. So those are real data there. That's how it's calculated with respect to the A, B, C, D, or F. What a lot of people don't see is the very first column there where it says raw scores. Once you go through the whole calculation, all the different algorithms and so forth, you get a raw score that is then converted into a scale score. So an example of that might be, again, there's lots and lots of tables that go with this. I just pulled some numbers out. But an example might be, I might have a raw score of a 60 that converts to a scale score of a 90 that converts to a letter grade of an 8. Or I might have a raw score of a 55 that converts to a scale score of an 80 that converts to a letter B. So what stays constant is the scale score and the letter grade. What changes is the conversion from the raw score to the scale score. Now look at what the right set of three columns where it says adjusted might look like, is what they're telling us is they know there's going to be challenges throughout the state with respect to test scores in the spring. And so a possibility would be is lowering the raw score to make that adjustment. So notice the raw score in the first column is 60, the raw score in the fourth column is 55. So now 55 might actually translate into a 90, a 50 might actually translate into an 80, a 36 might actually translate into a 70, and so forth. So one of the ways that they're making an adjustment is through that raw score conversion from raw score to scale score. Now, raw scores and scale scores very well used in numerous testing scenarios, so that part is not a new concept. But changing that raw score conversion in this particular setting is the way that they would make some sort of adjustments for the spring. Will they adjust them enough? I don't know. I can't really speak to that. That's just what they're telling us as far as possibility. Next slide, please. Some of the concerns about raw scores, the cut scores being changed, is that those would be overall cut scores. They're not necessarily taking into account districts or campuses that have high levels of economic disadvantaged students or high levels of ELL students. So not sure exactly what those cut scores, where we're going to land on those cut scores. Still some concerns there. Next slide, please. So some of the things to reiterate. So this first bullet, this is a concept or a statement that I've really been trying to stress at ATAC, and this actually ended up into the ATAC notes this time, so I was excited that we actually made a little bit of headway on that because we haven't been making much headway during our meetings. But basically, the agency can come up with some sort of system, but we all need to ask ourselves whether it's meaningful. It can diminish the credibility of the system of the future use. And so basically what that means is I can calculate a number on pretty much anything. You just give me something, I'll figure out numbers to go with it. Do those numbers have meaning? That's the key that we're interested in. So whatever calculation we have at the end of the school year in spring, what meaning is that going to have to previous years? Have no idea. I just really have a challenge with how that's going to be comparable. And we actually brought this up, I think, back in the summertime when we first started talking about accountability. I think we did a presentation back then, and we talked about that concept a little bit as far as the numbers have to have meaning in order for them to be useful. And then that last one, a system is being pieced together based on unreliable and invalid data due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. I think that one may be the scorecard, and I think Dr. Wirtz, were you going to review the scorecard?
Either I can do it, either way I can do it.
You can go ahead and do it. I wasn't sure which one of us was going through it, but go ahead, that's fine.
So this is the scorecard, which elevates the overarching areas that we're working on as a school system. And so there are 3 columns on the scorecard, one that's related to student outcomes, one that's focused on the experiences that our learners are having in the classroom, and then one that's really about efficiency. So for the student outcomes, you're going to notice that the scorecard targets are the same as they were last year, and that's because last year there was no accountability system really in place, in that we didn't actually assess any of our students on STAR, and so there was no way to adjust for any kind of movement. And so those targets remain the same, which is that we would perform at the 75th percentile amongst our peer districts, which we measure ourselves against school districts that are similar to ours, whether they with a plus or minus 10% of low socioeconomic status student ranges. And then also, of course, we wanted to maintain our rating of B. We also have a goal that all of our campuses will meet standard on-state accountability, and of the 14 campuses that received a D in the 18-19 school year, that at least 12 of them will have increased in the numerical value of their state accountability rating. And then finally, in the middle of COVID, we know that we have students that are struggling with their passing rates, and so we will be implementing our district and campus strategies to decrease the rate of failures among student groups at the campuses. For experiences, we are implementing safety protocols to address the spread of COVID-19. Several of these things include, but are not limited to, daily temperature checks that like you've heard mentioned this evening in one of our callers. These checks apply to students, staffs, and visitors. We also have daily health screenings for symptoms that come through the form of survey. Social distancing practices in the classrooms and common areas, mask wearing of students and staff, and then of course rigorous contact tracing when we identify potential exposure to COVID-19 at any one of our sites. We also are working to effectively implement the Connected Learning Framework, which you were introduced to before the start of the school year. And also, as part of that framework, our comprehensive instructional plan to provide both in-person and remote learning student opportunities to kids during this COVID-19 crisis. We're also working to conduct a comprehensive examination of our culture, our curriculum, of culture, curriculum instruction, and internal systems. And the effort around this is to strengthen, improve, and modify our organization as needed so that we can ensure both racial and social equity, and also to address any systemic bias or racism that might be occurring. And then finally, implement the identification of high potential leaders and teacher leadership pathways. And I had mentioned this earlier in the presentation. While it doesn't necessarily land specifically in our district improvement plan, it very much is a very core part of the work that's taking place in the district. And so it's notated here on the scorecard. And then finally, in terms of efficiencies, with respect to our resources, we want to propose general fund budgets aligned to the strategic plan priorities that you've set as a board, and also reflect those requirements that are outlined in House Bill 3 and limit the use of our fund balance. We also want to develop and implement comprehensive strategies to increase our enrollment across our campuses, and implement a comprehensive review of frontline our team system to improve our data integrity, performance, and the overall functionality of the system in Arlington ISD. And then finally, implement the 2019 bond program that was passed as it was developed with consideration noted for construction market conditions and the strategic project scope modifications. So at this time, The administration is recommending that the board approve the campus improvement plans, performance objectives, and the district scorecard. Questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Wirtz and Dr. Barlow. Are there any trustees with questions? Mr. Wilbanks?
Thank you, President Mays. So, Dr. Wirtz, going back to I guess kind of looking back on last year's planning process for the campus improvement plans, and you talked about the process on slide, oh, it's our page 5, the one with the rainbow arrows. There you go, back up. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned, you know, it all starts with a needs assessment and that root cause analysis, and then looking back, and then also then checking your performance 4 times a year, I think you said, over the year. But when we came together and we approved the campus improvement plans last year, no one could have predicted where we would find ourselves back in March of this year. And so how did COVID affect how you went about planning for this year's campus improvement plans?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the thing that was omitted as part of that process is any data we had specifically around STAR, since we didn't have STAR assessments. So what campuses had to rely on was any of their assessments that they had from their screener data that kids participated in at the end of the year, recognizing that that because kids were at home and it was on computers, that people struggled around that. And also, we also had participated in a couple of things before we finished the school year. We had done, of course, our CAs, our curriculum assessments, and we had administered not all parts of our benchmark exam, but several parts of our benchmark exam, which is a release STAR assessment. So campuses were able to look at how their kids were performing up to that point. The challenge around a benchmark that's just important to note is it's a release STAR exam. And there are lots of standards that have not been completely mastered by students at the time we give them. So really what it does is it gives people at campus level and the district level a sense of like how we're progressing towards a target that's going to be measured finally on STAR. And so even though those scores typically come back less than we would expect on STAR, there was some data sets that were there that they could then leverage. The last thing I can say that's helpful is campus improvement plans are developed a little bit into the fall semester. So some of the assessment data that they have from the fall can inform them about where their kids actually are today. Normally you would start your campus improvement process really back in June and July, and most campuses would rely primarily on that data. But this year they also had access to, for example, CA1 data and some of their initial screener data that came through, so they could see how their kids were performing as a baseline in their groups that were actually showing up in schools like this year. So that's kind of the data sets that were used this year that were pretty different from the past. Normally we have full-blown TELPAS data. We have several students where we didn't submit TELPAS last year. We normally have STAR. We didn't have any of that. So it was a little clunkier than normal, but everyone captured as much of the data as they could. Yeah.
So kind of using the process from last year, were you able to kind of trying to sum up what I think you were saying, by going in and doing the checks to see where we were on goal, and the fact that we weren't able to do that, were you saying that the indications were we were on target versus what our goals were in last year's campus improvement plans, and we just didn't have a chance to accurately measure it?
Well, it's hard to answer that question about how on target we were, because if you keep, as you mentioned, we went off in March, right? But we give the first benchmarks in the early part of February, so we really had one semester of learning. And so for us to be able to ascertain whether we would have met our goal by the end of the year just by a CA1 or a CA2, because it would be difficult, because even the benchmark that we normally provided, the robust area of the benchmark, we hadn't been able to give. So we measured, we were on track in terms of implementing our strategies. We were on track in terms of that, but what impact those strategies were having, it was kind of premature to know. That was our issue. I will say when we developed the plan for this year, especially even at the district level, we were able to lean into our data, and many of the goals that we initiated last year, we've carried forward this year because we still have a lot of work in those areas to do, and we were nowhere ready to say, hey, we had met the mark. And I'll just use reading as a good example. That's a multi-year goal. Mm-hmm. We initiated the process in the spring, but it got really hijacked with COVID.
Yeah, I imagine this whole process has been very difficult at best to try to wade through based on the disruptions that COVID has had, not this year, but I mean, not only last year, but this year going forward on these campus improvement plans. And I agree with you on, there were a lot of good goals that you guys had set, and both the district improvement plan process and goal 1 on the district improvement plan. I'm glad to see that carried forward. Just to be clear, on the, given that we had incomplete data for last year, so this year when they went through the gap analysis and needs assessment and root cause analysis for what they needed to do to come up with their plans for this year, was that made more difficult for this year in coming up with those root cause analysis, given that we have a whole new set of problems due to COVID?
Well, I don't know that COVID necessarily impacted the initial learning challenges that kids, in fact, gaps that they had last year. It definitely impacted, of course, this year in terms of how we could go about addressing those challenges, and the gaps that were generated late spring that we normally would not have had are showing up in school right now. So some of the adjustments to plans are even being made based on data from the current school year, which is not typical usually for a campus improvement plan. The one thing I can say about all of this is we really believe that a campus improvement plan and a district improvement plan should be dynamic. It's not set in stone. And it should be that way. This year, it's especially helpful because of the situation we find ourselves in. If we know that our strategies aren't necessarily working, or that the group of students that we're currently serving have gaps that we didn't anticipate because we couldn't measure it effectively last year as we ended the school year, campus principals and the district, we can adjust our plans even midstream, which is part of that process I was explaining a little bit earlier, which is this one around, in the 4 quarters, we kind of go back and make some adjustments. But yeah, it is harder. It's harder. The essence of it, the analogy I like to use is that one of going to the doctor. If you're going to the doctor and your doctor only has a few tests they can actually run on you because the battery of tests they normally have for you are unavailable, then he or she is going to make judgments about what's the best prescription to give you, but the information is incomplete. And that's kind of the way we're operating now. We're doing the best we can with all the information we have, but this big chunk of data that we have typically in the spring is no longer there. And so we're operating as if, it's the case here. And the last thing I just want to say about all this is it's connected to the accountability system, and it's morphing, literally morphing as we speak. So even as we did CA1 this year, and we project how kids could do at the end of the year, like we always do using CA1 data, we're doing that projection based on a set of rules that we actually don't even know will be in place when we actually take the assessment. So it's really, we're doing exactly what Dr. Barlow said. We're just doing the best we can with the information we have, but knowing that it's constantly changing.
Well, I feel for you guys. It's got to be difficult with all of these unknowns and, everything you use to base it on, basically it doesn't exist. Dr. Barlow, I'd like to turn it over to you to kind of hit home a few of the points that you made in your part of the presentation. On the CCMR, you mentioned that the military indicator code was going to be, I guess, stricter going forward, but we had the option of using last year's measure. Can you expand upon that and explain to us how, if it's going to be more rigorous or difficult to score as well, why that is, and what are we doing kind of going forward? Hopefully, we're essentially getting a mulligan this year, fortunately on that, and we can use last year's, which was, I know we improved pretty well in, but what are we doing for, say, next year to adjust so that we can meet those stricter requirements?
Sure, absolutely. So, when the CCMR concept first came about 2 or 3 years or 4 years ago, I'm trying to remember the year now, we, and I'm talking about all districts, not just us, but districts ask TEA continually, so how do we code students as military, or that they're moving towards the military? And the response that we continue to get back from TEA was that do the best you can. Basically, if you've talked to the student, or if they've indicated that they have inclinations of going to the military, but just do the best you can. We had no solid guidance on that. And when I say we, again, not just Arlington, but all districts throughout the state, we've had this discussion many times in various meetings. Then about maybe 1.5 years ago, I'm trying to remember the time period there, Dr. Wertz and I were at a meeting, and there was a representative there from TEA, and they indicated that that would no longer be the case, that what they were going to proceed with was obtaining a list from the military of all the students who actually joined the military. And so that changes drastically. So we went from do the best you can to figure out who's is intending on joining the military to you're not going to get to count them until they actually show up in an enlistment list with the military. Those are two very, very different calculations. So we've gone through this continual conversation with TEA and so forth. Our last conversation in ATAC about 3 weeks ago was that they are still maintaining that they're going to use the DoD list, the Department of Defense list. However, they still do not have that list. So will they ever get to the point where they can count them only if they have shown up on the DoD list? I don't know. They still are telling us that that's what they're going to do. However, in 2019, our understanding from our meeting 3 weeks ago was that if you use the 2019 CCMR score, if that one was the better one, that you would get to keep whatever you had in there as military for that year, which at that time we were still doing the intention, right? So that's gonna be a different score than the DoD list. If they actually come up with a DoD list for 2020, then they would only count our students who were actually showed up on the DoD list. So the kind of the nuts and bolts of the bottom line is, in 2019, we had the guidance that we were given was to count students as military ready if they had an inclination to go into the military. In 2020, what they're trying to do is come up with a DoD list and only use those students that actually show up on the DoD list. So you can kind of see the difference in that calculation. And since we really don't know students who actually showed up in the military, I mean, that's after they leave our high schools, right? And so we don't really know what that list says. So we're kind of at a disadvantage there with not knowing who's actually on that list with the DoD to begin with. So I don't know if that answers your question, or I can go into further detail if I need to.
No, unfortunately that answered it. So going kind of on the growth model, so it's my understanding from basically what I heard you say is that we're going, normally that's measured year over year, and to counteract that we didn't have STAR last year, they're just measuring over a 2-year period instead of that 1 year they normally do. But you also mentioned that you had some concerns with the matrix on slide, it's our page 8,
Yes.
so it'd be like 16, slide 16.
So there's a,
What specifically is you concerned about the, I mean, if they just extrapolate out over 2 years, and, well, I could see where measuring growth this year would be very challenging in and of itself, but let's say we did perform well. It sounded like even if we do end up taking the star, we end up showing up, I don't know that I track completely with what the physical issues with the matrix that they use to extrapolate out over 2 years, or what your concerns with, if you could reiterate what you
sure.
said.
So there's a couple of pieces there. Let me just do the 2-year growth to begin with. Is that when you actually do the calculation, well, let's start with the 1-year growth. When you actually do the calculation for the 1-year growth, let's say that I had a growth of 70 points. I'm just making that up. I don't have the charts in front of me. Then there's a chart that you go to that says, hey, if you made 70 points, then you fall into this part of this box of the matrix. So when you go to 2-year, then those points are going to have to be adjusted. In other words, I'm making this up. Instead of having, say, 70-point growth, you're going to have 140-point growth. So that puts you in one part of the matrix. Then you have another part of another axis of that matrix that says, did you move up from, say, meets to masters, or from approaches to meets, that type of thing. And so I had 2 concerns there. One is we don't have access to that first table to really do any sort of calculations internally. So we have, there's a table that they post, and we use that every year when we're doing our data wall and when we're doing internal calculation, that type of thing. We don't have access to that 2-year table now, so we need access to that. The second part is that matrix, even though it seems like it should work for 2 years just as much as it would for 1 year, since we don't have any data as far as kind of doing a stress test on it type of thing to see if it actually works for a 2-year model, I had concerns with that. I mean, you're kind of mixing a 2-year model with a 1-year model. I'm not saying it won't work. I just would like to see more data on it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was helpful. I think I better understand your concerns there. And I also share your concerns with the cut scores that you mentioned, and especially on how they set them, and then how we'll be compared to our cohort groups based on, and how equitable those changes will be for districts with economically disadvantaged students and such. What are the chances, let me just ask you this point blank, what are the chances that we can get some relief on even getting a letter grade assigned this year? Have we heard any rumblings? I know our local delegation and for political reasons during this election cycle have all put out statements saying that, they're going to pressure and make sure that we get relief on STAR. One of the biggest things would, the very minimum I'd like to see is, this is, as you pointed out, a mess to try to untangle and come up with anything meaningful. What's the chance of us at least getting the letter grade assignment relief for this year and not assigning a letter grade from TEA?
So that's a great question. So thanks for that question. And I'm going to kind of tease it out into 2 parts, which I think you were actually even hitting on earlier when we talked, when you were asking about the CIPs, is that we need data. I mean, we need to know where our students are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to assign a letter grade to that. And so the data, I think, is important so that we know we have data on students to where we can actually make improvements. However, the letter grade is a completely different process. What I'm hearing at ATAC, we've talked about this numerous times, is that it would have to be a legislative action, which would make sense. I mean, just with respect to the legality of it. because that was a legislative action to begin with. Whether that's going to be the case or not, or if they find some loophole there, I don't know. Just our conversation at ATAC was that it is basically that it would have to be a legislative action.
Yeah, thank you. And then I just want to close by saying thank you for your leadership on the committee that you sit on, and I think all of us all agree that I don't know how they're going to move forward, given the situation we're in, without undermining and without diminishing the credibility in the system, in this accountability system. It's just sounds like a futile task that's going to render it even more meaningless this year. But the punitive nature might not go away, and it's Kafkaesque. Very Kafkaesque is the situation that we I think face ourselves in, with this year's accountability and even next year's accountability, with the way we'll have the same issues on measuring growth next year. So whatever we can do to continue to advocate for relief for this year, I think we need to continue to push for that. So again, thank you both. I'll turn it over. I'm ready to make a motion, but I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues for any questions they may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Dr. Reich.
Thank you, President Mays. So that's a great segue to some questions and information that I wanted to share. So as of last night, Chairman Huberty stated that this was in a meeting of our North Texas Area Association of School Boards, he stated to all of us when we asked him about this specific issue on accountability that he's actually in complete agreement with us, what you just stated, Mr. Wilbanks, what we have been advocating for since May. And that, yes, let's still have the STAR test, let's still have the assessments. We need to know where our COVID slide is, basically. But A through F is a different discussion, and he's completely on the line at this point that during the legislative session, there will be legislation filed, they will push, and who knows, this is just from him. And he's an N of one, although he's chair of that committee, there's a lot more people that'll have input and pressures. But as of last night, that was the first positive indicator that I've heard, where he did state that we'll push for STAR, but we will push for district accountability A through F ratings to not be part of the equation this year. That he's already, or they have already given us EOCs, graduation committees, relieved the high stakes nature for students for the tests already, which I found interesting. I don't know that I had actually heard that, but he stated that very explicitly several times to all 115 of us that were on that call. And that as far as advancing to the next grades and that type of thing. So I share that information to follow up as administration as appropriate, but it's a glimmer of hope that perhaps we won't have to endure that. With that said, though, that leads me to my questions. Whether or not that does happen, I appreciate that the process, as always, that is involved in the CIPs and the district scorecard related to them. My question is, in the absence of a state accountability, which is what our student outcomes column on the district scorecard is focused on, is there a plan B? Are there other measures, are there other things that you've looked at to measure our student outcomes? And it's kind of tied to the experiences as well. Looking at the effectively implement the connected learning framework and an instructional plan providing both in-person and remote learning opportunities. I mean, it's no question that that's happening, and you have done that, and it's incredible what you all have done. And I'm really just transparently speaking and asking these questions. This isn't if it's coming off this way, I'm not trying to sound hypercritical whatsoever, but we know the realities of our current situation, our student experience. It's not a great experience if we look at failure rates. So if we tie that bit of information to our student outcomes that are not based on what we currently have in this column on the district scorecard, what is there a plan B? Is there a backup? What do we do to ensure that our outcomes are better than what they currently are tracking to be?
So that's a good question. The way I'd like to answer it really is that the initial targets that you see on the first 3 bullets under student outcomes are really overarching large bullets. If you were to dig into the district improvement plan, all the little things that we are using to measure actual student growth that would lead towards this final summative type outcome are being measured. So we're still tracking, for example, how kids are actually learning to read. We're still tracking on how kids are actually progressing in mastery of the curriculum. We do recognize that the experience, like you said, is rendering some students who are struggling and they're failing. We've noticed in our data that a lot of the failure rates that we have are students not turning work in. And so what we've tried to do is identify specific strategies as we're working with the district, with individual campuses to engage students who are actually in both the in-person and remote environments so that they can engage with the content in a more ready way and demonstrate their mastery so that we can reduce that failure rate. And so while there's not a specific target number on here, we do have it noted that we have strategies. And the reason why it's difficult to give a specific target is because the reason why kids are not passing vary, and we're in the process of investigating what that is. You know, we've looked at our numbers, we've looked at our data, staff, and so what we're trying to do is apply a swath of, so to speak, of strategies that could really impact what the failure rate would be. But we don't have a statistical model that can say, if you do this specific thing, this is how many points it's actually going to render you in terms of increasing or improving failure rates. So what we can say is we believe the strategies are going to improve failure rates, meaning make them less. But I couldn't tell you if I do this one thing, it's going to make it 20 points better or 10 points better. So landing on a numeric value to apply to a specific scorecard was our challenge. So we tried to, we wanted to acknowledge that was an issue we were working on, but we wanted to do it in a way that was going to actually, be sound.
So, and if I could add, Dr. Reich, and just kind of connecting some of the comments, make sure that, give a little context. So that's the issue. We've been asking, AISD has asked, probably one of the first districts to ask in May, to address the accountability and not have it for this school year. And the issue with that continuing to drag on is a problem for school districts, and it's a problem for AISD as well. And the whole notion that it's a legislative act, it was not a legislative act in the spring of last year. It was the Commissioner of Education said it was not going to be implemented. And so, I'm a little skeptical on some of that from the state, because I think part of the outcome is take STAR, and maybe we'll talk about accountability not being affected this year. Taking STAR is still an issue. We need the data, but it is so much of a disruption now that I don't know if that's the right source to collect the data. And Mr. Wilbanks made comments about our own formative assessments and our own assessments we have in the districts and the teacher-led work. The other thing is that there is no COVID baseline. None. This is the COVID baseline this year that we're in. So there is no, back to the failure rates, just to say it a different way, because we struggle with that. Well, should we decrease it by 20%, 10%, 5%? Well, there's no baseline. This is our COVID baseline. And so I think it's important to tie all these things together. And the reason it's on the scorecard, because I'm with you. I mean, it seems like we're talking about accountability, and that's heavy. And the reason it's on the scorecard is because they haven't made a decision from the state. And I think, and I'll just say this, maybe this is more of an editorial, but the state owes it to our teachers to make a decision about accountability for the school year. We're well into November. It keeps getting hinted, but they don't make a decision. And they didn't need to wait. They didn't have a session to make the decision in the spring. They made it. And I think that's where we are. And to Dr. Barlow's presentation, all the things he talked about, that he's on the committee, the leading edge of input. And quite frankly, that input is not necessarily being considered. And trying to find tweaks and ways, those aren't tweaks, those are major restructurings to an accountability system that yields who knows what results. And as Dr. Barlow said, because he says it often, we can create a number, the state can create a number, but it's going to be meaningless. So that's the challenge we're in. And unfortunately, until those decisions are made, we then begin to look at other ways of measuring student success. And the last point I'll make on this, because you talked about what's a plan B, a realistic plan B is how do we catch our students up from the gaps that they have related to closure and virtual learning and all the things that have happened. So those are things we're considering. The big domino is the decision on accountability. And there really is no reason to delay that from the state perspective. So I wanted to add that as a context.
Yeah, and I appreciate that that thought. One of the things that I immediately wrote down when he stated that position last night was the absolute sooner the better. So completely agree. With that said, this is maybe leaning a little off topic, but I think it's worthwhile for us once again to advocate, send a letter. Seeing he has stated that specifically, send it to him. He was over and over resolute on his communication and meeting together with Larry Taylor on the Senate side and the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor and the TEA Commissioner to make these kind of calls. So seeing he has put that out there for us, I think it's appropriate for us to say thank you for that and let's do this now. So
I agree.
that would only help. So I would make that recommendation
Absolutely.
to this board, to this district, as soon as possible. Maybe even a little Thanksgiving note. That would be okay. All right. Well, I don't have anything else. I appreciate the work that's gone into this. It is concerning to see where we are at, and we all just want what is best for our students. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Any other trustees with comments and/or questions? Okay. I don't see any hands. Dr. Barlow, Dr. Wirtz, once again, thank you very much. Using the reference that you used, I'm glad that at least as doctors, y'all are willing to run whatever tests you can, even if you can't run all of the tests. So really appreciate the continued efforts that you have with all of the missing data, the missing information, but understanding how important it is that we be able to follow our students in this interim. And it even sounds like to me, not all Graham, but hopefully when we have an opportunity to be back to normal, a lot of these gaps are going to close automatically. For instance, engagement. You know, that's just a matter of being in a different environment. Everything falls back to normal. So just really appreciate once again all the work that y'all are doing to try to maintain the accountability that we need and want to have. So thank you very much.
Madam President?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to move approval of the campus improvement plans, performance objectives, and the district scorecards as presented tonight.
Okay. Got a motion by David. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Melody. Is So motion by David, second by Melody. Any questions? Seeing none, we will vote. Since this is virtual, I will start to my left, and you can state your name, raise your hand, yea or nay. Dr. Reich?
Aaron Reich, I vote yes.
David Wilbanks, I vote yes.
Hogg?
Yes.
Mrs. Fowler?
Melody Fowler, I vote yes.
Mr. Chapa?
Justin Chapa, I vote yes.
Mrs. Walton?
Holly Walton, I vote yes.
Keisha Mays, I vote yes. All vote in the affirmative. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Wertz, Dr. Barlow. Our next action item, consider approval of fiscal year 2019-2020 independent audit. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays, and the board tonight will consider the approval of our fiscal year 1920 independent audit. And the board audit committee has reviewed this information, has a chance to meet with the auditors as well. So tonight we recommend the approval.
Are there any questions, comments from any trustees? Or a motion? Yes, Dr. Reich.
Yeah, I just would move to approve the audit for 1920 as
Okay.
presented to us.
Second.
Okay. We've got a motion by Dr. Reich, a second by Mr. Hogg. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. Dr. Reich?
Aaron Reich, I vote yes.
Mr. Wilbanks?
David Wilbanks, I vote yes.
Mr. Hogg?
Hogg, I vote yes.
Mrs. Fowler?
Melody Fowler, I vote yes.
Mr. Chapa?
Justin Chapa, I vote yes.
Ms. Walton?
Holly Walton, I vote yes.
Keisha Mays, I vote yes. All vote in the affirmative. Thank you very much, trustees. Next on the agenda, discussion action item, reopening schools 2020-21 plan update. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays. And so this evening, we provide, as we have for a series of board meetings, we provide an update on our implementation of our learning model, as well as the situation with COVID and the pandemic. And so at this time, I'll ask Dr. Brown to lead us through that presentation. It has, as always, a good amount of information, so we'll be happy to answer questions as well. So Dr. Brown.
Good evening. Thank you, President Mays, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide our return to school update for this evening. So tonight we'll talk about three different components of our return to school update. One is just a brief overview of enrollment, our data. We'll talk about our AISD and Tarrant County COVID-19 data and our dashboard, as well as talk about our recent Tarrant County school actions that have been recommended by Tarrant County Public Health. So as always, we do begin with our AISD guiding principles. Of course, starting with flexibility and grace, extending grace and asking for flexibility and grace in return as we all navigate this uncharted territory. Of course, educational equity, making sure all of our students have equal access to resources and to rigorous learning, whether they are in the virtual environment or they are in person. And then, of course, prioritizing the health and safety of our staff members and our students in our district, and leveraging stakeholder input as these all undergird the work we've been engaging in for several months now. So quickly about our enrollment, we are at still about 96.5% of our projected enrollment, and a little bit over 57,000 students who are currently enrolled in Arlington. I also wanted to share with you our in-person and virtual learning numbers so far. We are at about 53% in person and 47% virtual. There has been a little variance in that over, of course, the last several weeks, but nothing major that caused a huge shift. So the bulk of our conversation today is really going to be about the health and safety aspect of our in-person learning. So as always, we do begin with our Tarrant County metrics for safer in-person instruction. We all know that this information is available public facing on their website, and we also have it linked on our Arlington ISD website as well. So the metrics that of course are being considered is that 7-day moving average being less than 10%, ideally 5%, having less than 2,000 cases per week, having 4 weeks of declining case counts, as well as 2 weeks of declining COVID-like illness percentage. And the last one is the percentage of hospital beds being below 10%, COVID occupied hospital beds, I should add. So the data, as we see here, and we've been hearing about the data trending in the wrong direction. So our 7-day positivity rate is at about 16%. That was as of November 15th. Over 8,000, close to 8,400 cases last week in Tarrant County. And that moving COVID-like illness percentage is at 6.1. At this point, we have 15% of the total beds that we have in Arlington, in Tarrant County, occupied by COVID patients. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity just to remind our community and the board of our protocols that we will continue to be very mindful of and implementing with fidelity. And that is before anyone has access to the campus, that they have completed the health screening for our staff members and all of our students. We do continue our daily temperature checks as another way to screen for potential illness or symptoms from our students and staff members. When we do have an individual with a confirmed or suspected case of COVID, we do have a communications plan that we have been implementing quite a bit, and then engage in rigorous contact tracing to make sure if there's anyone who may have been a contact, that we notify them in a timely fashion and able to isolate them during the required time. Our cleaning protocol is still on point and making sure that we are very diligent about cleaning our buildings, commonly touched, doorknobs and handles and light switches and those kinds of things as well. And then of course, self-isolating the person who's impacted by COVID, whether it's the positive case or someone who's been a contact. So those people who are symptomatic are sent home immediately with instructions on when they can return back to the campus. And then we do have a risk, as I mentioned, cleaning protocol that does follow having a positive case on the campus. Also wanted to share with you just kind of how the campus prioritizes when there is a case on the campus, a positive case. So the number one priority is isolating right away, sending the individual home if they are still on the campus, of course. And then engaging in that process of identifying, isolating, and sending home contacts. And we, of course, notify them of their isolation period. It is a very complex, multifaceted process to contact trace, as I'm sure you're very aware. When there's a positive case on a campus, the principal who normally leads that process in partnership with the school nurse has to gather seating charts, for example, of in the classroom, the cafeteria, if the student rode a bus, if the student had a blended class, if the student was in athletics and was assigned to a coach's caseload. All of those seating charts and contacts have to be connected so we can make the determination if there was indeed an actual contact. So sometimes it takes quite a bit of time to engage in that process, and we're very, very methodical and strategic to make sure we do our very best to identify the people who are contacts. And then after that happens, then the campus administrator posts the information on the campus homepage, which is public facing. It allows parents or community members to be able to see if there is indeed a positive case on the campus. So we'll talk a little bit now about our AISD COVID data for our district. We share this with you during every board meeting. We currently have, as of yesterday, I should say, 337 staff members who are under quarantine. 66 of them were exposed at work. And then we have almost 1,500 students who are currently under quarantine at this time. This is our dashboard that is public facing as well. It's our weekly dashboard that we update on Tuesdays. As of yesterday at noon, we had 67 positive cases for staff members and 104 active student cases. Now we are making an adjustment to our dashboard that I wanted to share with you briefly, and that update is we still continue to update weekly, and that is really in alignment with our reporting to TEA. TEA requires by 5 p.m. on Monday that we've amassed the data that we need, and then we submit that to TEA and then upload it to our district website. The dashboard now will include not only the number of cases that we have for students and staff, but will also include the number of students and staff members who are isolated or under quarantine beginning on Tuesday with our next update. Our website also now provides a hyperlink. So if you were to go to our AISD webpage and you saw all the schools on there and you think, I want to look at Adams Elementary, you'll be able to just click on Adams and go straight to their webpage to find out the positive cases on their campus, or the letters, I should say, notifying parents or community members. And we're continuing to evaluate our dashboard and make adjustments as needed, again, to make sure that we have accurate information. As you know, it's dynamic and it changes over the course of a day many times. Starting the 24th, this is an example of partially what our dashboard will look like. We will see the active student cases as I showed you in the previous slide, and then you'll see the active number of students and staff members who are quarantined. And again, that will be a weekly update. So I referenced that you'll be able to go to our district webpage and click on any school. So if I were to click on Adams Elementary here, I would see that there's one active student case, staff case, 3 student cases. I can click on Adams, and if I click on Adams, it goes to their campus-specific dashboard, identifies who their campus COVID coordinator is. It also shows you the letters that have already been posted regarding positive cases on their campus. We also share the number of self-reports that come in monthly. And with this, again, when people self-report, it is typically because they've been exposed to someone positive. They may indeed be positive, they may be symptomatic, and they're getting tested. So it gives us an opportunity at any point in the day to have an idea of how many are maybe impacted by COVID-19. So as of yesterday, we were a little bit over 600. And you see we still have plenty of days left in November, but we're at 600 already in terms of self-reporting cases as of yesterday. So a couple of days ago, we did receive notice from Tarrant County Public Health and some suggestions for actions for schools. And so we want to share with you some of those suggestions that were made by Tarrant County Public Health, and then talk to you about AISD's current practices and additional ones that we're considering. Excuse me. So the first consideration from Tarrant County Public Health is the voluntary shutdown of sporting events. These are all things that we've considered as we've had conversations. And so we landed on, at this point, our student athletes and coaches are already screening prior to games. They are physically distancing right now to minimize contact, but we are going to continue to evaluate our safety protocols and then make any adjustments as needed down the line if we feel that's necessary to go that route. Another consideration is to reduce or to not have audience, not have spectators at our sporting events. So we've already taken the unique action of limiting spectator capacity to 40%, and our spectators are encouraged to pre-screen for symptoms prior to attending an indoor game. Our spectators are required to wear masks, and they are physically distanced as well. And again, we will continue to monitor this and make adjustments if needed in the future, if we see that becoming more of a challenge for us. Another consideration is implementing testing options. And we talked during our last board meeting here about the fact that we had ordered the Abbott immunoassay test from TEA, and they actually arrived today, just actually a few hours ago. They landed in Arlington. And so we are now finalizing preparation to be able to administer those rapid tests. The Tarrant County Public Health is asking us to enforce masking requirements, and something to consider would be no mask-free recess and no mask-free sports practice. So currently in Arlington, our students in grades 1 through 12 do wear masks. They are required, our staff members as well. Our pre-K and kinder, although not required, I can just share with you, just in visiting campuses, I've not seen many pre-K or Kers not have on a mask. And so we do see a lot of those students who are wearing masks as well. We are still allowing students during recess to have a mask break. They are monitored for social distancing, but we do give them that space and opportunity to be able to not have their mask on. They clean their hands before they go out. and they do clean their hands when they come back in from recess. Our athletes are wearing masks while they're on the bench, but they're not wearing them while they're practicing or on the field. But we will again continue to monitor that and make any adjustments as we feel that we need to in the future. Tarrant County Public Health is also asking us to highly discourage and penalize, if possible, any after-school parties or sports-related or otherwise. And so at this time, we are not, as a system, allowing any after-school parties. We are discouraging students from gathering after-school sponsored events, for example, after a football game, discouraging students from getting together, even at a restaurant or things of that nature. We will just continue to monitor that, but know that we are not any kind of school-sponsored event. We are not advocating for any type of gathering outside of the school day. The last part from Tarrant County Public Health is consideration for parents. So we thought we would just pair that with our current practice. And that first one is virtual learning. And so as you're aware, of course, we allow parent choice for virtual or in-person learning. However, we are going to share Tarrant County Public Health recommendations for parents to reconsider virtual learning if that is indeed an option for their family. Tarrant County is asking parents to cancel parties or social gatherings. Of course, we continue to encourage parents to reconsider any type of social gatherings that might become an opportunity for COVID-19 to spread. And then lastly is avoid sending symptomatic students to school. As we've mentioned before, parents are still required to complete the daily screener for their children to make sure that they are eligible to attend school on that specific day. So those are the Tarrant County Public Health actions that we've received. We wanted to share with you all and pair that with our current practice. And with that being said, that's the final part of the presentation. So happy to take any questions that you all might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown. Trustees, any questions and or comments? Yes, Mrs. Fowler.
Thank you, President Mays. Dr. Brown, that was excellent information. Thank you so much for all the columns and explaining everything. And maybe you already said this and I missed it, but I've had some emails from parents and teachers asking why we're not updating the COVID dashboard daily. So can you explain why the weekly is better?
Sure, thank you for that question. It's a valid question. I referenced earlier in the presentation, there is a lot of behind the scenes work that has to go into managing that for 70 plus schools in our system. And because the data is so dynamic, it changes literally every few minutes. And so we thought it was more appropriate for us just to align it with the TEA required weekly reports to make sure we're getting all the information out ahead of time. If there is a school that is impacted though by a positive case, that notification goes out right away. So if there is someone who's a contact or there's a case at a school, we do notify the campus immediately once we go through those final steps. So that's what I have to say. Dr. C, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or if that is sufficient for you, Trustee Fowler.
Yeah, no, so I think you hit it, and it's really important with dashboards and data for it to be accurate and not to cause confusion. And so as we update our dashboard once a week in alignment with TEA and their requirements, it allows that to be seamless but also accurate. And I will tell you, with the amount of contact tracing that's going on now and the amount of cases, and you saw the numbers, the focus is really to inform the people that are the close contacts about their quarantine, and then inform the entire school. And there's a process that happens almost immediately once we know where those things are. There's also a wealth of information in Tarrant County Health Dashboard that deals with county data, et cetera, with maps and Arlington, et cetera. So we want to make sure we're a part of that large data set, but that we're not causing some kind of confusion because we're trying to keep up with it every day. This is so fluid that we want to be accurate, and we want to make sure that our focus is on whoever is a close contact get notified as soon as possible so that they isolate.
Thank you, Dr. Cavazos, and thank you, Dr. Brown.
Any other trustees with questions? Yes, Mr. Hogg.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Dr. Brown and Dr. Cavazos, thank you for that answer. we may want to try to figure out a way to put it on the website to explain that, because we do receive a lot of questions about that. And I do think your exact answer is what most of us say all the time, and I think it is the correct answer to go about of how we tackle, how we move forward from that perspective on that. Dr. Brown, let me ask, and let me just commend staff as we've gone. I think we've been more preventative than a lot of other districts, and we've helped minimize a lot of that. And I think our model is doing a good job of how it is and currently has. Let me ask Dr. Brown, on those quarantine stats are on the dashboard, are those going to be weekly also in the same consistency?
Yes, sir, and I'll answer that, Tracy, but yes, because the same situation, people go into quarantine and out of quarantine at different times, and so the best thing is to capture a snapshot in alignment with our weekly reporting to give people a good sense of the quarantine numbers. So,
and as so then the second follow-up question of that is, as they're moved out of quarantine, that would change on a weekly status also, correct?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
So our quarantine will be a roaming number that changes as that weekly snapshot shows. How many are in quarantine will be what shows, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And I appreciate that. We are getting constant updates, so I know how much data, and I don't think people understand how much data goes into all this. So accuracy is a key factor for that. So I appreciate that's my questions over that portion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Ms.
Don't.
Mays, President Mays.
Oh, yes, Mr. Chapa.
Yeah, thank you, President Mays. Dr. Cavazos, I know that, Mr. Hogg just mentioned we get updates on a fairly regular basis as a board, a daily basis in some of the more severe cases of having to quarantine in terms of numbers. And could you speak to a little bit about what you and your staff are seeing on, it seems to be changing a daily basis, how things are going with respect to the increase in both cases and quarantining, and any patterns that you've noticed with respect to those things?
It's a great question, and so we have. I'll start with the big picture, and that is that our protocols, and thank you to our staff, our nurses, Annette Minnerly, et cetera, our protocols for safety and health, et cetera, are being implemented with fidelity. And we know, because we've known this since really the spring, that the foundation of that and the power of those protocols is really with contact tracing. If you want to mitigate spread, it's if you have control of contact tracing so that people who are exposed will quarantine. And I've just got to commend our staff. We are seeing a growing number of close contacts. And they're not all close contacts because at school, somebody came that became positive or was exposed somewhere else and they came to school, whether it's a student or staff. And our notification system, and I credit Annette Minnerly and working with our health department, to notify the close contacts is our mainstay with mitigating the spread. And that system is working. And we have tools, like I mentioned before, we have tools, and those tools include quarantining individuals, sending grade levels home if we can't staff it, or sending the entire school home and remote learning for a period of time. We've used those tools. We've already sent an entire school home. But the mainstay is the contact tracing, and I'll tell you that we're seeing the numbers grow. That's very clear across the county and our school district as well. And the caution that I use, or maybe the threshold, I guess, Mr. Chapa, is that if we struggle with contact tracing, it changes our dynamic. And we haven't struggled yet. It's challenging. I'm not minimizing it. But we haven't gotten to a point where, okay, we can't trace this, so we got to close the whole school. What we are facing is we have so many in quarantine, specifically staff, that we can't operate the school. And that's a reality. And again, unfortunately, that's predicted. And I do think that that'll continue to grow. I appreciate the tolerance of our community and our teachers, et cetera, for going into quarantine and, isolating and shutting the school down if we have to because we can't operate it. Those things are important, but those things continue to mitigate the spread in our schools. And we're going to keep using those tools. So we made a commitment that if we have operational issues or a large number of close contacts, that we're going to use those tools. And I anticipate that'll continue to grow. It's just the reality we're in right now.
So another question I had is there's been a lot of discussion, not just amongst ourselves, but in the media and the community about, it's really turned into sort of a sideline debate at this moment on whether or not schools are contributing to spread. And, you know, a lot of the information that's been shared with us is based on information that came out in September and early October, where not just here, but nationwide, and even in the rest of the world in places, the case counts were much lower and it was a much different environment. And so I know that we, you know, only have what's in front of us, which is anecdotal, or the data that we have here. It's not, you know, a scientific study, but are you seeing things like, whereas early on, we might have had a positive case come onto a campus, we quarantine individuals and none of the rest of the individuals ended up positive, and so we know that the spread we're pretty confident that the case was contracted outside of the school and it came onto the school building and then our protocols worked. Are we now in an environment where the community spread is so substantial that we identify cases, we quarantine individuals, and then those quarantined individuals are also later turning up positive, so we have some indication that some spread might be occurring on our campuses?
So it's a great question, and I'm going to turn that over to Annette Minnerly if she's on the call, Dr. Brown. I don't know if she is, but because that's an important question. I will tell you that, you know, our screeners, if they're implemented with fidelity, so I'll say it a different way, if people answer the screener accurately, so if you have any symptoms, you can't come to school, helps, because they just don't come to school. But if you're asymptomatic, obviously that's not gonna cover that. But Annette, I don't know if you heard the question, but if you would address that, that would be helpful.
Okay, certainly. The majority of the cases that we're seeing are just as what you hear the county say, they're from social activity or family gatherings. There's a very small number that do appear they possibly occurred at school. You know, we will have an individual that was positive and that will have another positive case from among the isolated individuals. To know for sure that it happened at school is difficult without doing, you know, absolute contact tracing within their entire life, you know, what all they've done in the past 2 weeks. But those are really minimal. I would say the majority of the cases, when we find out, you know, they say, well, you know, my sister was positive first, or I went to my grandmother's house and then we found out she was positive. They seem to be primarily social activities or family gatherings.
And I think that's precisely why the county is asking us as school districts, while we can enforce that, but to message that be careful with the activities, specifically activities around sports events, not the actual sport event, even though they have an opinion on that, but it's what happens after the event when people get together socially, and potentially what happens before the event. Our events, we already limit, as you heard in the presentation, we limit the occupancy. You have to wear a mask indoors, your social distance. So it's that activity outside of the event. And so thank you, Annette, for that.
And you mentioned that the contact tracing is challenging, but you don't feel like we're to a point where it is very, you know, so difficult to do that we're not able to accomplish it to the fidelity that we'd like. Are we in a situation where it would help us with contact tracing if we had fewer students on campus? Does that help that effort, or is it really not a major factor in it?
Yeah, so it does help. But I'll let Ms. Minnerly ask, because I asked her that question directly, I think, this morning. We don't have to go into all the questions I asked you, Annette, but I asked that one pretty directly, and she had an opinion, just like she always does. But I think generally it does, Mr. Chapa. It does help if we have fewer students. But Ms. Minnerly?
Oh, I think definitely it happened. It helps. We've really seen that with our high school campuses because we're in a hybrid model. It helps both with the contact tracing and also with reducing just simply the number of students who become a contact. Because we have more opportunity than just the weekend to have someone test or develop symptoms in such a way that they started their infectious period, they were at home because it was their days they were hybrid. And so when that happens, you have way fewer students. And in talking with some of my colleagues at campuses, districts that have not chosen to do that with their high schools, every time they have a positive case, they send anywhere from 10 to 40 people home with an average of about 20. And on our high schools, we've had a few instances when we have sent large numbers home, but we also have a lot of instances where either there are no contacts at all because the teachers are well able to keep the students separated and 6 and sometimes 8 feet apart in the classroom, or the number's very small, two or three students or staff members were a contact of that one individual positive person.
So does it seem then like most of our positive cases and the number of students and staff that we have to quarantine are just, maybe they more often occur at the elementary and junior high levels that are attending 5 days a week?
We certainly have more contacts per exposure in those settings because the social distancing is much more difficult when there's larger numbers in the classroom.
Okay. And I almost hesitate to ask the question, but just since we have been here this afternoon, and we're already getting questions from the community about it, and so I'll ask Dr. Cavazos what he knows, which I imagine is not much more than what has been reported publicly. Is TEA made an announcement today about they're changing the rules that we're subject to in terms of how long we can switch campuses back to virtual-only instruction, and we've been doing that on a more regular basis the last week or two. At first, it seemed like it started by grade level, and then we've had a few campuses have to go virtual only, but we've been limited in the duration that we're able to do that by TEA, and that changed today. So Dr. Cavazos, can you speak a little bit more to that and what those changes are and what your quick take is on what that means for us going forward after break?
Yeah, so the TEA today did clarify. I would probably state it like that, even though it sounds like an announcement. And maybe it was for a lot of people. We in Arlington have been in communication with TEA, and we already had that allowance to do the 14 days if we needed it. Now it's just official, right? And so we had an informal process of notifying TEA, and that started about a week ago, which is why you saw some of the things that we've been able to do. But that is the case. So districts have the 14 days. It has to be related to spread, contact trace, or operations. And again, those are the things that we have focused on over the whole period of time. It cannot be, and not necessarily saying that everybody agrees on this, but just to be clear, it's not preemptive. There has to be a situation at the school to allow the district to close. So you can't close if you don't have spread, you don't have contact tracing or staffing issues, then you can't really close. He made a slight variation, he being the commissioner, where, which is, again, sometimes gets lost in translation. But basically, you can shut down for other reasons, but you have to make up the time, which is not really a change. That's been the situation. You have to make up the time. There's some variation, and this is, we're getting clarification because it's a half day that you can do, and half day you have to make up and all that. Again, that's not really a tool. The tool for us is the 14 days, and if we have to shut down for operation reasons. And I got to commend our principals and our staff, our teachers, area superintendents for that communication. We did some today where we have to shut down for those period of time because of operations. There's too many people quarantined, too many staff members, and et cetera. And so those are the tools we're using. But that's what was discussed today with the commissioner in his presentation. And that tool is consistent with what we're doing.
So just to make sure I understand the part about being able to shut down for other reasons, which I would include in that community spread instead of just spread at a specific campus. So if we wanted to switch the district to virtual-only instruction for some amount of time because the community spread is so severe, even though we would be engaging district-wide in virtual instruction, which our high school students are doing essentially every other day, and which just a little over a month ago, our students were also doing on a regular basis. Those days of full virtual instruction would have to be made up in person at a later date?
So the minutes would have to be made up, you'd have to offer in-person instruction and to make up those days. That's correct. The clarification that, again, because these things are just announced without a lot of discussion, but I'll save that editorial for a minute. The clarification is when he discussed half days and making up half days versus the whole day. And that just, that it's still the same concept. If you close for any other reason, you have to make up the time. So pre-COVID, if we closed for any other reason, we had to make up the time. So that really is consistent. What I'll say is that we have more flexibility, even though it doesn't sound like it, more flexibility using the tools of the 14 days, et cetera, when we have an issue at the school. And the issue at the school, again, just to reiterate, significant spread, difficulty in contact tracing, or staff and operation issues. And we have faced probably the staff and operation issues the most because of the number of quarantine. So that's how it's laid out.
Yeah, and I would just share, I mean, I reluctantly agree with that approach because it just seems odd to me to say, and this is unfortunate, that in order, if we felt like the community spread was so substantial to do our part in terms of halting community spread from a public health standpoint, we would be going to virtual-only instruction to avoid a pandemic just so we could later send people back into a classroom at some other point during the same pandemic. I mean, that sort of seems a little odd to me. So I guess we will just keep using the tools that we're using, and so much credit to you and your staff. I know this has been incredibly disruptive. We're hearing from lots of community members, parents, and staff, and even a few students about their experiences with this. And I know it's very difficult on everyone, and everyone has a lot of different opinions. And y'all are doing a very admirable job balancing a lot of competing interests and competing viewpoints. And I don't know if I've met or discussed with many people during this pandemic, people who have less than a very strong opinion on whatever their viewpoint is, and it's just very difficult to manage that, and y'all are doing a good job doing it. And I would just say to any parents listening, and I'll say this publicly, I've been saying it privately, if you are a parent, and I've heard from a few of you who've emailed me, and you are wondering, is this the time for me to move my student back from in-person to virtual instruction because your family's in a position to do it, I would say now is the time. I know that's not the district's official position, but that would be my recommendation. If you are a parent and you feel like you're on the fence, this is the time. It would be very helpful to our staff, it sounds like, in terms of doing our contact tracing protocols if there were fewer students on campus. And this is the holiday season and the numbers are spiking, and if the epidemiologists are correct, this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And so that is what I will end on tonight.
And if I could just add, thank you for the reminder. It is a parent choice to make that decision to go remote. And I credit the board and our staff because early on we did several things while they are very challenging, and I completely recognize that, so I'm not minimizing it. But one is we made it where it's possible to switch instructional modes by the student and the family without having to wait an entire semester or grading period. And while that seemed challenging at the time, and it is, it pays those dividends because people can make that decision, Mr. Chapa, as you mentioned, whenever they want. The other is the instructional model that our staff, with input from teachers and principals and others, where if you're an online learner when you go to school, and we said this early on and it didn't maybe resonate as much but now it does, you're always an online learner. And the reason for that is because you may quarantine, and we may be in a situation where your school shuts down for a period of time. And we want that to be seamless, so that your instruction is seamless, where the teacher is providing instruction to those at home and those at school, so that if we have to go virtual. Can't tell you the number of stories with other districts, and again, not to compare or anything, but other districts where when they have to quarantine, it becomes very disruptive for students, staff, and parents, because their model is not the one that allows the seamlessness. Again, filled with its challenges, very difficult for teachers and students, but ultimately, the model that we implemented was for these periods of time when we're sending groups and groups of students back home to quarantine. And so I just commend our teachers and our staff for having that resilience and that patience to implement that type of concurrent model, is another way of describing that. So thank you for that reminder.
And we, just for clarity, I know you implied it, but just for the virtual world that's watching, quarantining of our staff and or our students and closing schools, education still continues virtual. It doesn't mean that they're quarantined and not doing anything.
That's correct.
The teachers are quarantined, but they're still teaching virtually then at home.
Yes,
The
ma'am.
students are still learning virtually at home. If we have to close a school or grade level, that grade level and those teachers are still learning virtually at home.
That is absolutely correct. Thank you for that. Also clarification that the instruction just moves to remote instruction. And the teachers are teaching, the students are connected, and that's where that seamless transition happens. When we're in this period of time, we planned for these times. And I know it's difficult, but these are the times we planned for, because we're seeing more and more quarantine. And to your point, President Mays, the quarantine means that they're doing their work from home, they're teaching from home, and the students are learning from home. And this is the environment we're in. And those cases are growing across the county, and we're interdependent in many ways.
All right. So thank you, Mr. Chapa. Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. Any other questions and or comments from, yes, Dr. Rush.
Thank you, President Mays. And to Dr. Brown, Dr. Cavazos, everybody in the district, I echo Mr. Chapa's comments on the level of effort and fidelity that you are going through with this balancing act. It's quite incredible. It's impressive what you're able to do. And it's unfortunate that we are still having to deal with this entire situation. Just to, I guess, an editorial, it seems to me with the TEA guidance, which I know maybe this is preliminary, and we'll get more clarity, but a half-day makeup for any other reason, i.e. not active cases at a school, seems to me a carefully placed disincentive to give us the option for virtual education. Crafty. Maybe that's incorrect, maybe that's premature, but that's my editorial on that. I just don't think that's right. So one of the things that we are all very concerned with our students' well-being and failure rates and that type of thing, of course, our teachers and the heavy lift that they are enduring. We've had some reliefs put into place. Out of the survey and anything else, can you give us a snapshot of maybe other reliefs that might be there for our teaching staff, whether that's you, Dr. Cavazos, Dr. Brown, Dr. Wertz, and whatever that may be to aid that? You know, if there's curriculum and instruction opportunities to create some virtual template models for teachers, whatever it may be, because this isn't temporary, this is long haul, and I'm very concerned about our sustainability.
Yeah, so I'll let Dr. Brown and Dr. Wertz answer the first part of that, or about the review of the changes that we've made specifically to deadlines and things like that. I think, Dr. Brown, you sent that summary recently to principals as well as a reminder. So you want to go through some of those, and then we'll continue that?
Sure, thank you for that question. So again, just evaluating some of the deadlines that were locally imposed deadlines. We made some adjustments with Reading Academy, with some of the SEL, social emotional learning modules that were due. The Connected Learning Framework just reminded staff that there's not a deadline to complete those. It's really as you need the information to be able to engage in the module. Also reminding principals about protecting teachers' planning time, so they have that opportunity to still be able to plan, make phone calls. The planning is even more in demand than it was before. And then another opportunity that we're providing principals are right now in the process of creating plans for PLC support. So even if it's after school, it's an optional opportunity for staff members to engage in PLCs if they can't, since they can't do it during the daytime, and that we're even considering compensation for them if they do stay after school to engage in the PLC. Those are some small, small adjustments that we've made. Continuing to monitor staff meetings and not having an inordinate number of staff meetings for teachers after school is another thing that we're certainly making sure principals are aware of. And then just doing our best to be mindful of the current emotional space. Principals doing their best to just support them emotionally as best as they can, knowing this is a challenging time for everyone. But those are a few of the adjustments we've made in terms of, deadlines or requirements they have to engage in, trying to stretch those out as much as possible while still giving them the information that they need.
And I'd just add, Dr. Reich, that also an important one is the efficiency by which we send a grade level home or a school completely home when there is a struggle with coverage of the classrooms, because that's also a stressor on top of everything else. When we quarantine a teacher who now her kids are still coming to school, but they have to go to another class, or somebody has to cover that. That has been also something that we've worked really hard, and I credit Dr. Brown and her staff as well, because that efficiency is really important, so that when we're stretched thin, then we make that decision. We don't wait for a breaking point. And I think that's important. I think Dr. Brown mentioned compensation for PLC time after school, and working on that plan, and making sure that they have adequate time for planning. And you know this, and we all know this, that it's kind of a dichotomy, right? Because there has to be some planning and some work in terms of action planning for failures and things like that. But there's also teaching and learning that has to happen, and that is normal. It's completely, exponential now because of the environment we're in. But I do think the efficiency of sending quarantine, the fidelity of our protocols. We get feedback from campuses that they appreciate the fidelity of our protocols because we're taking action when there's a problem. And so our survey results also show that majority are using their planning time for planning. And I think that's an important feedback. But we continue to evaluate. There'll also be opportunities we didn't get much into this, and we will in a future meeting, but to do student surveys as well, and their state of emotion and why and how they can help support to help pass and things like that. That's a little down the line.
I do appreciate that information, and yeah, I think we're all concerned about our social emotional aspects of our students for sure. Going back to teachers, and the efficiency of quarantines, and that is duly noted. It's seems to have been working pretty darn well, and thank you again for that. Is there opportunity with, as you said, the dichotomy between the planning and the teaching and learning? Part of that is the fact, and this ties to the students and potential failure rates or actual failure rates, is having the teachers now have so many extra touch points that they have to make in order to try to reach those students or those families. And I believe that, you know, families should be accountable, students should be accountable, and on the school system side, it seems that the teachers are the ones that are making that reach out to them to help promote and perhaps try to enforce that accountability message. And that takes, especially in a virtual environment, a lot of time. And has there been consideration, are there thoughts on how to shift maybe some of those touch points to take it off of the teacher as the responsible party to do that, and use other human resource for that?
So campuses use a number of different staff members to help with that, with attendance and things like that. It is certainly a staffing issue. School wasn't designed this way, as we know, to accomplish this. So there is a team effort at the campus level, but that goes only so far. And then the biggest effect on a student is their teacher, and we know that too. So that it's a careful balance. But those are things that are just inherent challenges with the way we're facing this pandemic in instruction. So that's one that would be helpful, but I think it kind of is recursive, right? Because if students begin to engage and families begin to engage and things like that, then there's less contact that needs to be made. You know, so at this point, that's the requirements we have from TEA in terms of how do we account for attendance. Quite frankly, there's several big things that the agency could do. One is to rethink how we do attendance. And there's just, even though we have a hold harmless period, there hasn't been a budge on that at all. And we're about to face, not a hold harmless in the spring semester, at least not for now. And the whole notion of the accountability. Those are two big levers that the state has control over. So anyway, that addresses that.
I appreciate that. And is our team system still set up to send out the automated notifications of zeros, non-turned in assignments, attendance?
Yeah,
it's just a matter of if those parents are paying attention to it.
It's very
I apologize.
efficient.
It's been a couple of years since my kids have been in the system, so I assume that's still happening.
So I would say it's very efficient and very persistent.
For those that are interested in engaging with it.
That's right.
And I hear this in the community all the time, sadly even now, that we've got to hold these kids, hold these parents accountable. There's only so much that we can do as a district legally. So I just put that out there for anybody that is listening in that might have that opinion. Unfortunately, there is only so much that we can do. So we've got to, and we have so many models implemented to help engage our families. So I have just a couple of, one observation and one question. This would be for Dr. Brown. So one observation was the number of staff quarantined due to work exposure versus total in quarantine. And that number was 66 from work exposure versus 337 total. I think that kind of speaks to everything that we've been talking about tonight, due to the tremendous abilities to lock a classroom or a school or whatever it may be down as soon as possible with the contact tracing. I think that's a bit of data that emulates that. So I think that's important. And then the clarification for me on the self-reported cases by month, those are not COVID positive self-reports, right? Those are essentially COVID or COVID-like illness self-reporting. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It's a combination. It could be they tested positive. It could be they have COVID-like symptoms. It could be they were exposed to a positive person. So those are all the three major reasons why people will self-report.
Yeah, and I say that because that it might, I might suggest relabeling that graph, because it does lend itself to that there's that many cases, and people, they hear cases, they think COVID positive cases, when that's not actually the case. And I know we have our dashboard that backs up the true case count and that type of thing, but just to make it a little bit more clear, that might be a recommendation there. Thank you to everybody for everything, and we'll look forward to more updates as we move on. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Any other questions and/or comments from trustees? And Polly, we know you're still out there. Okay, once again, thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for that report. Before we move to the next item on the agenda, I am so sorry, one of my favorite areas of the district. The financial report that we approved, if I could just very quickly add, for the information that we have here, just wanted to give a huge thank you to our finance department, led by our CFO, Darla Moss, for all the hard work that y'all put together for putting this report together that we approved this evening. So I apologize, but I definitely wanted to say thank you very much for the hard work, for all of this information. Such a good read. Thank you so much. So just wanted to say thank you to the staff, and thank you to Whitley Penn also for providing their independent audit report. Okay, next on our agenda, items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda. Are there any items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda? Okay, I see none. So tonight we will be considering the items listed on your agenda under consent items. Dr. Cavazos, would you like to introduce?
Yeah, so there are no bids for consideration, just the monthly investment report.
Okay.
Darla Moss, do you want to say anything else?
No, sir, I think you covered it. Thank you.
That is efficiency.
That is efficient.
Okay. So is there a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Move for approval.
Okay. I have a motion from Mr. Hogg, a second by Dr. Reich. Any comments? Seeing none, we will vote. Dr. Reich?
Aaron Reich, I vote yes.
Mr. Wilbanks?
David Wilbanks, I vote yes.
Mr. Hogg?
Louis Hogg, I vote yes.
Mrs. Fowler?
Melody Fowler, I vote yes.
Mr. Chapa?
Justin Chapa, I vote yes.
Mrs. Walton?
Polly Walton, I vote yes.
Keisha Mays, I vote yes. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, next on our agenda are open forum for non-agenda items. Mrs. Benjamin, do we have any requesters registered to address the board regarding non-agenda items?
Yes, ma'am. We have one registered speaker, Miss Stephanie Hudson.
Okay. Ms. Hudson, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Hi, we sure can.
Okay, good. It's
Let
good
me
to
just
see
make
you all
one
again.
comment before you start speaking, okay? For the record. The second open forum segment of the meeting provides citizens with an opportunity to address the trustees on any subject except personnel. This is not intended to be a discussion or a debate, and trustees will not reply to the speakers. Derogatory comments aimed at an individual will not be tolerated. You will have 5 minutes to speak. Mrs. Benjamin will notify you when your time is up, and at that time, please end your presentation. Okay, Ms. Hudson, your time starts now.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go right ahead.
All right, very good. Well, this year I'm serving as treasurer for Arlington's chapter of ATPE. And I wanted to start by thanking you all for the quick responses that our officers have received when we've submitted questions regarding this Kafkaesque time, as Mr. Wilbanks so eloquently put it, and so true. We find ourselves in this strange time, teaching, coaching, leading, providing transportation, serving meals, and providing nursing care to our students during the COVID pandemic. We also want to thank you for your cautious approach last spring and early this fall, as there were so many unknowns. And we truly appreciate your leadership. I will also add after the discussion you had earlier, that we're very pleased to hear about the updates you're making to the COVID dashboard. And that will give us more information on isolated students and staff beginning next week so we can make appropriate choices for our families and ourselves. As we often do, ATPE officers collaborate with the TSTA board when we have common issues that arise and approach the board as a group to avoid redundancy. You don't need to hear the same thing twice. So we put our heads together earlier today and collaborated and decided to speak to our collective membership tonight. What we respectfully ask from you this evening is a published, easily accessible, step-by-step process for requesting campus leave for teachers who need to go home, who are medically fragile, or who are caring for someone who is immune compromised. Here's why we're making that request. The communication our organizations are receiving from members makes it clear that there are rampant misunderstandings about how to approach this process in the chain of events that occurs after a request. Some teachers have reported that they're asking their principals about teaching from home due to medical concerns and are point blank being told no, and are not being referred to the place where they can fill out the self-report online and begin that process. So all of this confusion is leading to hurt feelings and unnecessary fears and avoidable resentments and all of those things between teachers and administrators, so sometimes between teacher and teacher. So one teacher texted me and said, and I quote, "I feel completely betrayed by the district, like they don't care about my health or my family's health," unquote. So I feel like, we feel like that's probably not what anybody wants, and probably a misrepresentation maybe of what's going on. So another message we received alluded to principals playing favorites, they feel, with their teachers. And one teacher wrote, quote, "My principal clearly has favorites and has gone as far as to allow another teacher with no medical reason to teach online from another state since the summer. But even though I have documented medical history, I'm afraid to ask about teaching because I don't feel like she cares for me or that I'm one of her favorites." So these are just a few unfortunate examples of the clear evidence we're getting that there are these avoidable situations that if they're left unresolved, they're just going to hurt morale and cause undue stress at a time when teachers are already hurting a lot, as you have all recognized tonight, and I appreciate that. What has become increasingly evident is that there's inconsistencies in how some administrators are communicating to teachers and staff regarding the leave. So I was able to speak with Mr. Kale today from HR, and I appreciate his time. And I learned that there is a very clear procedure that HR follows once employees fill out the self-report on the intranet. I truly do appreciate his time and transparency, and I have asked him to make readily available that step-by-step process that HR is following, which he described in our conversation. He seemed pretty positive about being able to do that, so I'm looking forward to that. So to be clear, we're simply asking for transparency in regard to the process and to have readily available those procedures that are taken to make decisions on who is approved and who is not approved after a request to teach from home. If a teacher is denied who possesses medical documentation, we also additionally feel that they should be given a clear and distinct written reason as to why they were denied. These steps will help put an end to some of the ill will and misunderstandings that seem to be brewing on some campuses. So please know that truly and deeply, teachers want to be at work. We want things to be normal again.
Ma'am, thank you. That is the end of your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next on the agenda, Superintendent's report. Dr. Cavazos.
Again, my report will be consistent. It's a thank you to all our teachers and staff across the district, and wishing them a very safe and restful Thanksgiving period. And I appreciate them sincerely. That's my report.
Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. Are there any school board reports? Yes, Mrs. Fowler.
Today at Rotary, we had Professor Jason Shelton, who is a sociology professor at UTA, and he's also on the Unity Council for Arlington. And he was really singing our praises, saying that he's been working with us, and AISD is doing such a great job of working to be a diverse and equal opportunity and equity. So he was very impressed with everything that we're doing as far as diversity.
Thank you for sharing that, Mrs. Fowler. Any other board reports? Okay. Seeing none, Ms. Secretary, do we have any items to consider?
No, ma'am, I don't think we do.
Okay. All right, so it is 9:50 p.m. and we will now move into a closed meeting pursuant to sections 551.071 through 551.084 of the Texas Government Code in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act for the topics set forth on our agenda. Thank you. It is 10:03 and we are back in open session. Today is November 19th, 2020, and the Board of Trustees will now consider the recommendation for decision by an independent hearing examiner appointed by the Commissioner of Education in the matter styled Arlington Independent School District versus Katra Ridgeway, docket number 096LH072020. The following board members are present: Ms. Polly Walton, Dr. Aaron Reich, David Wilbanks, Keisha Mays, Bowie Hogg, Melody Fowler, and Justin Chapa. I am Keisha Mays, and for the record, a quorum is present. The independent hearing examiner issued her final recommendation for decision on November 16th, 2020. This meeting is being held on the first meeting for which there was time to properly post pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act and within 20 days of the receipt by the board president of the hearing examiner's recommendation. Will the representative for the employee please state your name and whether you are a licensed attorney?
Gianna Ortiz, yes, I am a licensed attorney.
Thank you.
Daniel Ortiz is also a licensed attorney serving as my co-counsel.
Thank you. Will counsel for the district please state your name and whether you are a licensed attorney?
Scott Thomas, and yes, I am a licensed attorney.
Co-counsel Dennis Eichelbaum, yes, I'm a licensed attorney.
Thank you. This proceeding will be closed to the public in accordance with section 551.074 of the Texas Open Meetings Act unless the employee requests that it be open to the public. Does the employee wish this proceeding to be open to the public?
She does.
Okay. The board has reviewed the record and the final recommendation of the hearing examiner. I will now ask each member of the board whether he or she is able to serve as an impartial member of this body and to arrive at a decision based solely upon the record and recommendation for decision by the independent hearing examiner and the arguments presented at this meeting. Any member not able to act in such a manner may say so and ask to be excused. Dr. Reich?
I am.
Mr. Wilbanks?
I am.
Mr. Hogg?
I am.
Mrs. Fowler?
I am.
Mr. Chapa?
I am.
Ms. Walton?
I am.
Keisha Mays, I am. I will now instruct the parties on the procedures to be followed in this proceeding. Both parties will be granted 15 minutes to present oral argument regarding the recommendation for decision by the independent hearing examiner. As the burden in this case is upon the district will open and may reserve part of its time at the end for rebuttal. The argument portion of this proceeding is being recorded by a certified court reporter. By written argument with Ms. Ortiz, the board will deliberate in closed meeting following argument, and the deliberation will not be recorded by the court reporter. In compliance with Texas Government Code 551.103A, The board will prepare, certify, and file a certified agenda. Board members sit as a panel of judges and are to remain impartial. Board members will not be questioned by representatives or witnesses. The rules for this proceeding are as follows. Only one person talks at a time, no interruptions. Objections will be addressed to me for my decision. The representatives are not to argue directly with each other. The audience may not talk or in any way interrupt the proceedings. Any disruptive behavior by any member of the audience will result in his or her expulsion from the room. The hearing participants will conduct themselves with common courtesy and respect for the rights of others. Before we begin, do you have any questions on the procedures for our meetings today? No questions, okay? The district's council is free to make their presentation. In just one moment. Ms. Benjamin, are you keeping time? Thank you very much.
May I proceed?
Yes.
President Mays, board members, my name is Scott Thomas, and along with Dennis Eichelbaum, we've represented Arlington Independent School District in this termination matter. Katra Ridgeway's continuing contract was proposed for termination for many reasons, including because she made unprofessional, offensive comments based on race and sexual orientation. She failed to maintain effective relationships with her colleagues and a good rapport with her colleagues, and she created a hostile work environment for her assistant coaches. Texas Education Code 21.259 allows the board to reject certain parts of the hearing examiner's recommendation. We believe some of the hearing examiner's recommendation, the findings in fact in particular, are not supported by substantial evidence, and the conclusions of law are incorrect and should be changed or rejected. I have, if I may pause for a second, I would like to hand you an exhibit. We are handing the board members as well as opposing counsel an exhibit. And in this exhibit, we have listed several findings in fact and conclusions of law that we believe should be changed or rejected, and I would like to talk about those for a few minutes now. Finding of fact 66 states that Coach Ridgeway did not make insensitive or discriminatory statements to students based on race or sexual orientation. Finding of fact 66 is not supported by substantial evidence. The evidence shows that Coach Ridgeway admitted that if a female student had to tell her mom that she was in a same-sex relationship, it would have a negative impact on her, and it could impact her mental health and endanger her physical health. Ms. Ridgeway admitted asking the student if her mom knew she was in a same-sex relationship. Ms. Ridgeway discussed the student's sexual orientation and told the student she needed to tell her mom before Ms. Ridgeway did. The hearing examiner found Coach Ridgeway told the students, "She is black and loud, so people think she is angry. But when you're soft-spoken and petite and don't look like her," meaning black, "things are different and people don't think you're so bad." The evidence shows that assistant coach Sarah O'Neill was the only soft-spoken, petite, white person associated with the Seguin girls volleyball program at the time. The hearing examiner found that Coach Ridgeway singled out a student based on race, referring to an unrelated person as that student's cousin. Ms. Ridgeway texted a white athlete that a black athlete would not be allowed the same opportunities like most Caucasians. Ms. Ridgeway similarly texted that black athlete that she would not be afforded same opportunities as Caucasians. The hearing examiner also found that Ms. Ridgeway made comments like, "Those are your people, that's your brother, or that's your cousin," to a white player in reference to another white person who was not related. Ms. Ridgeway made comments that refs would favor the other team because they're white, or that it would be harder for Seguin to get points because they're a black school. In November of 2019, Ms. Ridgeway said to a student's sister over FaceTime, "If they can't use my comb, don't bring her home." meaning that if a person was not the same race, they could not date or were not allowed in the family. Ms. Ridgeway said, "We have to head over to those country-fed white girls," in reference to going to play the Granbury girls volleyball team. Ms. Ridgeway told the entire Seguin volleyball program, "Black people get mad about white people shooting black people, but don't get mad when black people shoot black people, and they should. And those people who don't look like the student who was killed are lying." The independent hearing examiner found when Ms. Ridgeway said these things, quote, "It was not said to be unjust or derogatory. However, a white person may be offended, but a black person would understand the comment," end quote. That finding was not supported by substantial evidence. The evidence showed that Ms. Ridgeway's assistant coaches, Coach Hill and Coach O'Neill, were offended. Coach Hill wrote it down and gave it to her principal. Coach O'Neill testified that she found the comment, quote, "extremely inappropriate." Ms. Holly Howell, a former athletic trainer at Seguin High School, also testified it would not be appropriate to say. And a former student black athlete of Ms. Ridgeway's said that Ms. Ridgeway's comments about race did seem derogatory. The hearing examiner's recommendation contains the heading, "Failure to maintain an effective working relationship or maintain good rapport with parents, the community, or colleagues," under the hostile work environment discussion section, but it includes no findings of fact or conclusions of law. However, the evidence conclusively shows that Ms. Ridgeway did not have a good rapport or effective working relationship with her assistant coaches, O'Neill, Coach Hill, and Coach Tanya Johnson from the previous year. All three of those assistant coaches testified they did not have a good rapport or effective working relationship with Ms. Ridgeway. All three said they did not want to work with her again, and all three said working with Ms. Ridgeway was a hostile working environment. The hearing examiner's findings of fact regarding hostile work environment are not supported by substantial evidence, and the conclusions of law are incorrect and should be changed. The hearing examiner did not even discuss the relevant board policy, DIA legal, in her discussion. Some of the evidence of a hostile environment included Ms. Ridgeway did not invite the Caucasian assistant coaches, Coach Hill and Coach O'Neill, to the team bonding event at TCU, and instead invited her African-American friend who works at another school. Coaches Hill and O'Neill had to share a seat on the volleyball bus to an away trip, while the seniors had their own seats. And Ms. Ridgeway, as well as her husband, who was not even with the volleyball program at the time, they also got their own seats on the bus. Ms. Ridgeway removed Coach Hill and Coach O'Neill from the Remind app and the groups for volleyball, the team and the parent reminds, which Ms. Ridgeway used to communicate with players and parents about things that she would frequently change, such as the schedules or study hall or which jerseys to wear. Coach O'Neill testified that that was the information she needed in order to do her job. Coach Ridgeway had the freshman and JV athletes report to her after practice how the JV and freshman practices went, instead of Ms. Ridgeway just asking her assistant coaches. Coach Ridgeway yelled at her assistant coaches. Coach Tanya Johnson testified Ms. Ridgeway was condescending and rude and treated her like a child. When Coach O'Neill heard Ms. Ridgeway say, "If she can't use your comb, don't bring her home," and that children of mixed races do not fit in on either side, it upset Coach O'Neill because she is white and her husband is black, and they have a biracial daughter. Coach O'Neill testified that Ms. Ridgeway knew that she had a biracial daughter at the time Ms. Ridgeway made the comment. Ms. Ridgeway's frequent comments were offensive. Her conduct was unprofessional and violated state law, the Educators' Code of Ethics, and Arlington ISD board policies, including FFH local and DIA legal. It is against the law in all school districts in this state to harass or discriminate against an individual based on race or sexual orientation. Ms. Ridgeway's conduct failed to meet the accepted standards of conduct for the profession as generally recognized and applied in all districts in this state. We ask that the board adopt the findings in fact and conclusions of law as listed on the exhibit provided and reject or change the remaining findings in fact and conclusions of law. We also ask that the board find that Katra Ridgeway failed to meet the accepted standards of conduct for the profession as generally recognized and applied in similarly situated school districts in this state, and that Katra Ridgeway's continuing contract be terminated for good cause, and that any and all relief requested by Ms. Ridgeway be denied. Thank you. And we'll reserve the rest of our time.
Ms. Benjamin, how much time do they have remaining?
They have 6 minutes and 5 seconds left.
Okay, 6 minutes and 5 seconds remain. Okay, the Employees Council may make its presentation for 15 minutes.
Before I begin, may I ask Ms. Benjamin for a wave or reminder at about 10 minutes? Okay, thank you. As you know, we're here to consider the independent hearing examiner's recommendation in this case. And let's be clear, Coach Ridgeway won her case. This district retained an independent hearing examiner appointed by the Commissioner of Education to sit for 5 days to listen to your attorneys present evidence against her and to make an independent judgment about that evidence, to decide and recommend to you whether good cause to terminate her exists. And this hearing examiner is clear. Good cause does not exist. Not even close. Coach Ridgeway grew up extremely poor. She's one of 10 siblings, the only one to go to college. She went to college on an athletic scholarship guided by a high school coach who told her, "This can be a way out for you." And it was. For Coach Ridgeway, that athletic scholarship to Prairie View to run track, to play basketball was her way out of Karnak, Texas. She has been dedicated for over 20 years to teaching in this district. She has taught since 2002 at Juan Seguin High School. She moved into Arlington in the 1990s. She and her husband, Mr. Renwick Ridgeway, bought their home in the Seguin neighborhood when that campus was just a cornfield. And when Coach learned that they were going to be building a school there, she applied. And she worked for Mr. Farmer. She was on the very first staff. She's been a varsity coach and a teacher since 2002 in that building. Her evaluations are impeccable. She's been written up, and she'll tell you herself she's not perfect. Since 2002, she has had the opportunity to receive some feedback in writing from her supervisors. But she's never been accused of creating a hostile work environment. She has never been accused of making inappropriate racial comments. Not once. Until she was brought in for a Q&A session with Mr. Borden, the principal of that campus, on November 18th, 2019, 1 year ago yesterday. And on that day began the first of 4 different questioning sessions where she was given no information about who was accusing her or of what, and she was asked questions about the incidents you just heard about. Did the assistant coaches one day have to share a seat on the bus? Did you one day describe yourself as black and loud? Did you one day say that your son's aunt said that if the girl can't use my comb, don't bring her home? Can you imagine that? She had never had so many as 2 conversations with her principal in all the years he had worked there. He had not gotten to know Coach Ridgeway until that meeting, and that's not a way to get to know somebody. To ambush them with questions about seemingly unrelated events, with a blindfold on and their hands tied behind their back. Figuratively, of course, but she doesn't know what's going on. But she can tell she's in trouble. And she knows she's not perfect. And she understands that she may have done some things wrong. But she knew since those Q&A sessions that none of this deserves to get me fired. Because all of her comments, and the independent hearing examiner tells you this, after listening to the evidence, after judging the credibility of the witnesses, after hearing the context, the independent hearing examiner tells you that these are comments that in large part were meant to address racial and social inequity. That's what they were aimed at. And on June 12th, you all passed a resolution to that exact point. You all recognized to this community that racial and social inequity exists for Black people. You all vowed to this community to focus on fixing that. Now is your chance. We didn't know this. Do I have 10 minutes left or 10 minutes have elapsed? Thank you. She didn't know during those Q&A sessions, but she learned during the trial that those allegations were made by 2 first-year assistant coaches, 2 Anglo assistant coaches, who we learned at trial, and you will see in the record, were asked by Mr. Borden in the fall to begin keeping journals about their concerns about Coach Ridgeway. And those journals are where these allegations come from. They were writing down every conversation, anything that sounded a bit off, observations about tone of voice, occasional racial statements. And they presented that to Mr. Borden, and within days, she was in HR being questioned about these things. And within days of that, and in fact on November 22nd, just 4 days after that first Q&A, Mr. Borden recommended to HR in writing that Coach Ridgeway be terminated effective immediately. It took just 4 days for him to decide that those journals mean she needs to get fired. And that's not how it should work. Trustees, that's not how this process is meant to work. As you know, Mr. Borden cannot terminate Coach Ridgeway effective immediately. There's a process. And on December 5th, she was brought in for one final question and answer session, if you can call it that. And at that meeting, Mr. Kale told Coach Ridgeway, "Your behavior is reprehensible. It's been reprehensible for a long period of time. I understand you don't want to resign, and if that's the case, we will take this case to termination, and I have no doubt," he said, "that it will be successful." I wish that that was an isolated event in this school district. I wish that teachers who have served your students for over 20 years didn't have to have their dignity dropped onto the floor like that. But it happens, and it's not right. She's given a lot to this district, and the testimony showed, and you can read it in the independent hearing examiner's recommendation, the testimony, 11 witnesses she brought, parents, students, assistant coaches, supervisor, all of them said, kids go to college because of this coach. She understands what it's like not to have someone at home to push you to do better at school. She knows what it's like for the coach to be the only one who's there cheering you on and making sure that you're getting good grades. She set higher expectations for academics than is required, nothing short of a B average, and in trial she testified that one of her proudest accomplishments is that her 2019 volleyball team, all but two, made all district in academics, meaning all A's. That, my friends, is a winning record. That is service to Wansegin High School. And she has spent since 2002 doing that. She relates to those kids. She beat the odds. She has a stable household. Her 3 children finished at Seguin High School. All went to college on academic scholarships, 2 of them to the Air Force Academy. Her husband she brought from private industry to teach engineering at Seguin High School and coach track with her. In 2015, they took a team from underdogs to state champions. She works with these kids. She works for your kids, trustees. I don't have time to tell you everything I want to tell you about her. I don't have time to tell you all the things about this case that just make me so very disappointed in the actions of this district. In addition to the fact that they took the word of 2 first-year assistant coaches, Anglo women, in order to tell HR that they were going to propose immediate termination, I want to tell you about the affidavit evidence that was presented in this case. I want to tell you about, in March of 2020, months after Coach had been removed from the campus, the Seguin High School administration had a child sign an affidavit. That affidavit contained verifiable falsehoods. It said the kid was on the varsity team with Coach Ridgeway. That was false. It said that she came out to her mother in the fall of 2019 because Coach Ridgeway threatened to terminate her. That was false. And how do we know that was false? Because that child's mother came to the trial and testified. She testified, she spoke to you all in public comment on Monday, as a matter of fact. But she came to the trial and she testified to those same things, that this woman saved her older daughter's life, that her daughter now plays volleyball in college because of Coach Ridgeway, that her younger daughter never played varsity for Coach Ridgeway, that her daughter never came out to her in the fall of 2019. Those were lies. She had never seen that affidavit. She was very upset that the administration had this child sign a sworn statement without permission. And she confirmed that this is a very troubled little girl, and that this is a little girl who has problems telling the truth. And that, if it were true that this coach were punishing students for the reasons that have been alleged in this case, she should be fired, and she would stand behind the district in firing that coach. But that just didn't happen here. Good cause is a high standard. It's a lot to prove. The district had its chance. It had 5 days to bring its case and failed to do that. You guys have a lot of difficult decisions. Hearing the public comment today, I don't envy you. There are some situations where there are no good answers. But this is not a difficult decision for you. The independent hearing examiner has made a recommendation, and it is clear, and it is strong. In February, Coach Ridgeway was watching the board meetings because she was waiting for the proposal for termination. She watched every single board meeting. And in February, Ms. Mays, she heard you identify her as a Black hero for Black History Month. And she was humbled by that. But I am here to tell you that that is the truth. That is the truth. In February, when you said it, it's true today. It was true in November. She is a hero for you. in this district, and this independent hearing examiner has recommended that she go back to Seguin High School, that good cause does not exist to terminate her, that she's a dual contract teacher coach and the district can't take that away from her, we ask that you make this easy decision and adopt that recommendation. I do believe, and I do believe sincerely, that it will be one of the greatest privileges in my legal career when I look back on it someday to have represented this woman. She is good through and through. And witness after witness after witness confirmed that. She's a good mentor to the kids. She's a good parent to her own children. She's a good mentor to the kids and to her assistant coaches. Do the right thing, please. Thank you.
The district may now make a closing. You have 6 minutes and 5 seconds left.
Thank you, Madam President, board members. Sometimes heroes make mistakes, and there are consequences for making mistakes. I'm not saying, and the district isn't saying, that Ms. Ridgeway should have all of the things that she's ever done forgotten, but there are consequences when you do certain things. And we all know those. I want to start, though, with the hearing examiner. And where do we get hearing examiners? The Texas Education Code says that there are to be these hearing examiners, and there's a list of, I believe, 20 in the Metroplex, 18 or 20, that are hired. And in order to become a hearing examiner for a school district, you have to have not worked for a school district and not worked for a teacher organization. So you have to start off without having any real experience with school districts. All right. These individuals are permitted to make recommendations only. They have some courses that they have to take. They have to take 3 hours of continuing ed in school law, and then 7 hours of trial advocacy. Again, they can't represent schools or educators. And then what happens is they're given the opportunity to serve for the Commissioner of Education. And so schools are required to utilize these individuals for terminations. And so they sit and they listen to a hearing. And sometimes the hearing is a day long, sometimes apparently it's 5 days long, as they listen to and they collect evidence. But the Education Code is very clear. The decision isn't for the hearing examiner, it's for the board. The board is the only one who can make the decision because it's your policies. You're interpreting state law. You're deciding good cause, not the hearing examiner. And it's very intentionally done that way because the legislature actually originally said that the boards can change any conclusion of law and they make the final decision. And then after a bunch of really bad decisions, because some hearing examiners have actually never ruled against employees, they came back and the legislature changed the law to say, you know what, if the finding of facts if there isn't substantial evidence to support a finding of fact created by a hearing examiner, the board can overturn that. And so it is your responsibility to look at the record and make determinations. You're the ones who get to make the final decision. Hearing examiners never get to, and plenty of them are overturned. So with that, keep in mind, under the law, it only takes one of the reasons that were listed to terminate this individual's contract. If you found that this individual did one of the violations, you have the right to choose to terminate. Okay. Now, with that, let's look at, again, what she's accused of. And I don't have the time to go through all of the different things, but what I want to point out is that when you read the recommendation. By the way, as far as competency for recommendation, you would expect hearing examiners to at least be able to spell the word recommendation right. But, be that as it may, in this case, even though it's very clear that she takes the side of Ms. Ridgeway, even she says, okay, yeah, she did say these things. She did make the comment about the comb. She did make the comment about race with, this is your cousin, to the white student. She did talk about the gay and the towel pushes for the gay students, and that you have to tell your mother, otherwise I will. Those are all in there, and she had to acknowledge those. What she said was, well, they weren't frequent. They weren't pervasive. Yeah, they were offensive utterances, so she even admits she said these. So what the board has to decide is, because she doesn't tell you, how many times does a teacher get to say these things to children? How many times do you get to embarrass or humiliate a gay student? How many times in our district are we going to allow someone to make what we all know were racist statements? We all know that if a white coach said the same things about an African American or a Hispanic student, I'm not sure that we'd be thinking about this very long. We want equity in this district. Equity is for everyone. And so, with my time, which I know is not much, I want to end with, they've made it look like Ray Borden was out to get this individual. That's so unfair. In fact, his assistant principal, when his assistant principal was out, he let her be acting assistant principal because she was trying to get her certificate. He didn't try to fire her right away. In fact, it took 4 Q&As. There was a long time that we examined all this evidence. And in the end, we said, we can't in good conscience not take action, because if we allow her to do this, we have to let others do this. And that's not who we are. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank both of you. We will carefully consider all the information you have shared with us this evening. The board has retained counsel that has not participated in this matter and may consult said counsel on this matter. The board will now deliberate in private and will announce a decision today, or will hold a special meeting within 10 days from today, at which it will make a decision. The board's decision shall include findings of fact and conclusion of law, and may include a grant of relief. The Board of Trustees may adopt, reject, or change the hearing examiner's 1, conclusion of law, including a determination regarding good cause for termination, or proposal for granting relief. The Board of Trustees may reject or change a finding of fact made by the hearing examiner if the finding of fact is not supported by substantial evidence. The Board of Trustees shall state in writing the reason and legal basis for any change or rejection. So the board will now go into closed meeting under Texas Government Code 551.074 and 551.071. The time is now 10:40. We are now back in open session. It is 12:40. And we have a few questions that we'd like to ask of both parties. Can you hear me? Okay. Of both parties. So we've got questions we're going to ask that Justin ask all the questions, therefore we're not going back and forth. So Justin, I'll turn it over to you.
Start with, we have a couple questions for the district's position. And I don't know whether who's going to. Okay, we have a couple questions for the district's position. Can you hear me now? All right. So first question for the district would be, we were told by, I believe it was Mr. Thomas, that the board has the authority to reject certain parts of the hearing examiner's recommendation. And then Mr. Eichelbaum said that essentially we could do whatever we wanted with respect to the hearing officer's opinion. So what parts of the hearing officer's opinion are we required to accept?
The board is permitted to reverse any conclusions of law if they justify it in writing, and if they find facts for which there is the substantial evidence in the record, they can make those changes also. But, and they don't have to accept any final recommendations. And Mr. Ortiz?
Good evening. That I do agree generally, but, and the Texas Education Code is clear, that the school board can change and or modify a recommendation's conclusion of law if the board states each reason for saying. But please understand, and this is very important, a school board cannot change findings of fact as long as that finding of fact is supported by of course, substantial evidence. And 40 years ago, I said, well, that's a lot of evidence. No, it's not. That we lawyers know in the criminal courts you have beyond a reasonable doubt, that's this much. And that normally civil courts beyond a just simple preponderance, which one's a little heavier, 51-49. Like counsel said, substantial evidence means a just mere scintilla of evidence. Very little. And most respectfully, that this independent hearing examiner heard 5 full days and she wrote 47 pages. She heard the evidence, y'all didn't. And she weighed the evidence.
A little far field from our questions. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up. Okay, going back to the
statute.
I think we've heard enough on this point.
I was just going to read the statute, but if you know it, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Eichelbaum.
Okay.
And these questions are meant for the district. There's a few that we're going to maybe apply to both sides, but this is for the district side. One of the bases that was argued earlier is that it was racially discriminatory or hostile or somehow improper for Coach Ridgeway to suggest that black students might have different opportunities than white students. And the question is we enter as a board into a discussion of racial equity, how is it possible to have that discussion in a non-racially hostile or discriminatory way to the district?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part of it?
Yeah, so if it is a basis that you've argued that Coach Ridgeway acted in an improper way for her to suggest to a white student that a black student might have different opportunities than the white student, how does that factor into how is that different from having a discussion of racial equity generally?
I believe our argument was that it was said in a manner that was pejorative towards the student in question, that you have advantages and said in a negative manner, as opposed to, I think there are very proper methods for any educator to converse with students about racial equity, but this was said in a manner of, you have advantages and you're treated differently, you're treated better, and it wasn't done in a positive manner that would promote racial harmony and equity. It was said in a negative manner towards this individual, is our position.
Is there any testimony or evidence in the record that this individual to whom those comments were directed perceived it that way?
Not that Mr. Thomas is aware of. And he was the one who did the examination of that witness.
Respectfully, this witness did not testify, was not called by the district, and there is no evidence of saying.
Okay. Do we have?
I'm sorry, she needs to be able to hear what Gianna said.
Respectfully, this witness did not testify, was not called by the district as a witness, and there is no evidence of same.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. To the district, what evidence in the record is there that the treatment of coaches O'Neill and Hill was racially motivated? Or is that not is the district's position that it was not racially motivated treatment?
I believe the district offered several examples, some of them being that Ms. Ridgeway invited her African-American friend to a team bonding event instead of the two white assistant coaches. The other examples included
but is there testimony in the record that they weren't invited because of their race?
No.
Okay.
But for it to be discriminatory, someone doesn't have to come out and say, I'm discriminating against you based on your race.
Sure,
Right?
but
So when we combine
other than
a lot of the
circumstantial,
instances-
you're basing it on the circumstance of the white coaches were not invited.
Yes, in addition to the comments Ms. Ridgeway made about the comb and mixed grandbabies not fitting in on either side, which was said in the presence of the assistant coach who had a daughter who was biracial.
But those events were those events temporally connected in some way, or some sort of relationship between those two things, or those two disparate incidents that you're discussing?
Those were two separate instances.
So going back to the discussion of substantial evidence, the hearing examiner made several findings based on credibility that Coach Ridgeway did not punish students based upon their sexual orientation. And at the hearing, there was testimony which the hearing officer found credible from individuals involved in same-sex relationships, that Coach Ridgeway does not act discriminatory towards individuals involved in same-sex relationships. So if that is the case, what authority do we have as a board to set aside that particular factual finding?
Well, first of all, it's a conclusion of law whether or not it's discriminatory. And some students did take offense. And it is the students who took offense that when you're looking at discrimination, you look at, are there individuals who, and these are students, took offense to the statements. Now, the fact that all didn't doesn't change the fact that some did.
So, and that's a good segue to our next question, which was, we noticed during the presentation before that if the student testimony was referred to by affidavit. So was there live student testimony at the hearing given that those incidents occurred, or is the student testimony on that point all by affidavit?
The student testimony on that point was by affidavit. The students had agreed to testify at the hearing, and then weeks before would not respond to phone calls from Dean Lundeen and Principal Borden about the appearing for the hearing. So multiple attempts were to serve 3 students with subpoenas, and we have due diligence affidavits that are in the record showing those attempts and showing that those individuals evaded service, so we could not have them appear for the hearing.
Okay.
Which is why the affidavits were admitted as under an exception to the hearsay rule.
So those, the affidavits are in the record and we're entitled to rely on them?
That is correct.
Or is that something
Exhibits-
that's something respondent's going to dispute?
Well, Exhibits O and Exhibit P were admitted into the record for the truth of the matter asserted by the hearing examiner.
Okay, and I'll let you respond to that, Ms. Ortiz.
The hearing examiner admitted these affidavits, but in the recommendation, she tells you that both on their face and through the testimony of the child's parent that I described during my argument, where the parent was able to verifiably dispute and deny that either any of these things had occurred, she in the recommendation indicates that they are not reliable, credible evidence, and she didn't rely on them.
So that's, if you can stay up there, just a point on that was brought up is what the hearing officer seemed to imply that the student was not credible based on the mother's testimony. Is that a valid basis for finding the student non-credible?
The due process hearing entitles us to a right to cross-examine. We objected to that affidavit being admitted because we had no right to cross-examine that child. The independent hearing examiner is the judge of the credibility, and she weighed the written document and the parent's testimony and determined that that was not credible. And yes, I do believe that's a legitimate basis to make a credibility determination, especially in light of all the other credible testimony that she heard about Coach Ridgeway, that particular allegation about discrimination based on sexual orientation was verifiably false. We had multiple witnesses in same-sex relationships who witnessed Coach with students who were in same-sex relationships, who had a same-sex orientation, and never witnessed that type of discrimination. So weighing all of those things, we have the recommendation that you have before you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chapman, may I clarify?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I don't know if it was clear from my previous statement, but the parent who testified was one of the parents who evaded service, and it is shown in the due diligence affidavits that 3 attempts were made, and she was contacted and notified, told the process server that the daughter would call, which didn't happen. And as far as the recommendation, the hearing examiner only addresses the credibility of one of the student's affidavit and completely ignores the affidavit of another student who made similar allegations. I believe that's Exhibit O.
Is that student TK?
Yes.
Okay. And then, I guess on that point, the hearing officer also did not seem to reach a correct determination with the testimony of Coach Tanya Johnson. I believe she said that Coach Johnson testified that even though Coach Johnson was in a same-sex relationship, that Coach Johnson had never heard anything offensive about individuals in same-sex relationships, but I believe the testimony on that point was actually different. Is that correct?
That's the district's position, yes.
Okay. Sure, briefly.
No witness testified to witnessing disparate treatment based on sexual orientation. Not Tanya Johnson, nobody. TK's affidavit contains hearsay within hearsay, where she says something to the effect of that she heard that the other student who made an affidavit was punished for being gay, or that she believed that students were punished for failing to come out to their parent. But TK made no allegation as to herself, and the record was clear that these kids suffered consequences, not for their sexual orientation and not for failure to come out to their parent, but for, school-type offenses like PDA, not wearing the correct uniform, being late to practice. And so there is no evidence that any student was made to do any consequence based on sexual orientation, and in fact, that did not happen.
But I mean, if I'm looking at the transcript here, and I think Coach Johnson testified in the transcript at page 246, and then also in her affidavit, says Coach Ridgeway made this from her affidavit, made offensive offhanded comments in my presence about same-sex relationships, knowing that I was in a same-sex relationship. I believe that Coach Ridgeway treated me differently because of my sexual orientation. Are you saying, is it your position that that was not competent evidence that was in the record, or?
The hearing examiner weighed the evidence brought by Ms. Johnson. Ms. Johnson, who never brought those concerns to Coach Ridgeway's attention. Coach Johnson, who suffered a very poor evaluation, which she did not dispute during the time that she was Coach Ridgeway's assistant. Coach Johnson is the coach that the athletic coordinator for the campus told Coach Ridgeway, I know you needed help with that poor performance from your assistant coach. So there were motivations that the hearing examiner heard during the witness testimony and the contradictory testimony from so many others in which she weighed that and came out with the conclusions and the findings that she did.
So basically your position is that even if the hearing officer incorrectly stated that Coach Johnson hadn't testified that Coach Ridgeway had said anything with respect to sexual orientation, your position is still that there was enough conflicting evidence in the record that the hearing officer could make a determination on that?
And are you asking if the hearing examiner made an error in her
Yes.
typing,
In her factual finding?
if that means that there was not other evidence that she weighed heavier than the typo evidence that she's finding in the paragraph that you're talking about?
Okay.
And I'm asking for clarification. Are you asking me if the fact that she made a typo means that?
Well, I mean, I think it was more substantial than a typo, and I can look it up, but she incorrectly found that Coach Johnson didn't have testimony on this point when she did.
If that was an error, I believe the great weight of the evidence and the substantial evidence certainly, and more than that, supports that there was no conduct like that, not against Tanya Johnson, not against anyone else. When you review the record, you see that Tanya Johnson, others observed her performance issues. Coach Ashley Barron testified to that Coach Johnson was not a committed coach. And so, yeah, I mean, I believe that there were other motivating factors and other testimony.
Okay. I think I've only got a few questions left. But we've got others, but I'm gonna try to narrow it down to get to the most salient ones. So, and this question is for you, Ms. Ortiz, but if there's several reasons that the hearing examiner lists at the beginning that's just a recitation of the reasons for the proposed termination. And one of those was that Texas Educator Code of Ethics Standard 3.2 says that the educator shall not intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly treat a student or a minor in a manner that adversely affects or endangers the learning, physical health, mental health, or safety of the student or minor. So the question here would be, there seems to be some dispute over Coach Ridgeway's conduct with respect to student KL and whether or not she was made to do towel pushes because she didn't, in essence, wouldn't come out to her mom. And there's a dispute on that point. But in Coach Ridgeway's testimony, as I understand it, was that student KL was actually doing towel pushes because she was caught multiple times engaging in PDA, and that it was Coach Ridgeway's policy to at some point notify the parents when students had been caught in PDA. Given what Coach Ridgeway knew about student KL's sexual orientation, why wasn't it reckless for her at least to realize that KL thinking that she would call her mom, even with respect to just PDA, would necessarily have made her come out to her mom?
This child did not believe that. This child was not told that. This child already shared with Coach Ridgeway that her mother was aware of her same-sex relationship or same-sex orientation because she had already shared with Coach Ridgeway months prior that her mom didn't want her to have a girlfriend. There is not a dispute that Coach Ridgeway made that child do towel pushes. That affidavit is not credible evidence and was, I don't believe, relied upon by the hearing examiner in making her determination at all, as it should not have been, because it was proved verifiably false by her parent. In other words, the child says, so I came out to my mother. I was afraid that Coach would call my mom, so I came out to my mother. The mother testified she did not come out to me during that time period. That statement is verifiably false.
So your position is that that's substantial evidence, that's a substantial evidence and we can't revisit that because the hearing officer made that determination?
The hearing officer determined the credibility of that affidavit.
Of the mother, okay.
And of the affidavit as well.
Okay. I think two more questions, and this is something that came up. A board member had a question on the comments. There seems to be some discussion in the hearing officer's opinion that the comments that were made, and Mr. Eichelbaum touched on this in his closing, that the comments probably were or could have been perceived as offensive by some individuals. So, two of the proposed grounds for termination are inappropriate and/or offensive comments to students, and then one is to staff or other adults relating to race and/or sexual orientation. If the hearing officer concluded that the comments in effect were offensive or could have been offensive, why aren't those two grounds not sufficient to uphold a termination?
Because in a hearing on a continuing contract termination, there is a distinct standard of review for the hearing examiner, and that it would be good cause to terminate in similarly situated school districts. And the Supreme Court in Rio versus Northeast ISD recently said that when that conduct amounts to judgment calls, then evidence of similarly situated school districts must be presented. There is no substantial evidence. There is no evidence whatsoever of standards of conduct in similarly situated school districts. You cannot, the hearing examiner could not decide for herself or decide for yourself what is acceptable in other school districts similarly situated to this one. The district had to present that evidence at trial, and they didn't.
Okay.
So even if the statement were offensive, and even if there were a finding that the statement may be offensive to some, that would amount to a judgment call for which the termination has to be supported by expert testimony or other evidence of acceptable standards in similarly situated school districts.
Okay. And then a question on, a very similar question. So grounds for termination E, failure to maintain an effective working relationship or maintain good rapport with parents, the community, or colleagues. The hearing officer found that Coach Ridgeway didn't, and Coach O'Neill did not have good rapport or good working relationship. Same with Coach Hill, and same as to Coach Johnson. And then she didn't testify, but there was evidence in the record and testimony at the hearing that was also true for another coach who didn't coach the 2019 20 school year, but maybe the year before. So, isn't that sufficient to support the termination, that there's essentially 3 findings in the record that Coach Ridgeway and at least 3 and possibly 4 coaches in the last 2 years of her employment had severe issues with their working relationship?
So 2 points on this. One is that, again, a judgment call. And the district had the burden of proof. The district has the burden to prove that would fail to meet the standards of good cause in similarly situated school district. Didn't present any evidence of that, not a shred. So.
Could you pause for a second? Ms. Walton went out and she's about to get back. There she is. Okay, thank you.
Do I need to repeat anything?
I don't think so.
No, I think she was just out for a second.
Okay. So again, you can't make that determination. The IHE could not make that determination without evidence that conduct, particular conduct, would violate or would constitute good cause in similarly situated school districts. And 2 is that the Commissioner of Education has made clear that unless you are endangering the mental or physical health, which there's no allegation that she was doing that there, that you're entitled to remediation. And that is no coach, no administrator, not the athletic coordinator, no one had brought to her a concern that she was creating a hostile work environment or had bad rapport with her coworkers. And the commissioner has said, unless the health or safety is in danger, the teacher is entitled to remediation, and that is notice. Ridgeway, you better shape up, and an opportunity to fix it. And if she doesn't fix it, well, that's on her. But she never got that notice. She never got an opportunity to fix it. She never was placed on a growth plan in all her years. She was never offered additional coaching. in these respects. And so for that reason, to uphold a termination on that basis is setting yourselves up for reversal.
Mr. Eichelbaum, do you have anything to add on it? I appreciate discussing standards of review and burdens as an attorney, but I don't know if my colleagues have the same affinity for it as I do.
If the question is, do I believe that if this board chose to rule on those, I do believe that the Commissioner of Education would uphold the Board of Trustees, because I think there is sufficient evidence, substantial evidence, I should say, in the record to rule that she should be terminated. I can also tell you that it can then be appealed to court, and no lawyer here can tell you for sure how the commissioner or any court will rule, but I do believe there is substantial evidence.
Okay.
Mr. Chapman, can I briefly respond to that?
Sure, that was my last question, so briefly, please.
Just briefly, please.
Speak into the mic, please.
Mr. Eichelbaum inadvertently stated the law incorrectly. This board's not a trier of fact that the independent hearing examiner was. And Mr. Eichelbaum said that there is substantial evidence to support whatever that you suggested. That's not the test. The test is this board can't change a finding of fact if there's substantial evidence that supports it. And that, as you know, that's different.
Okay, thank you. Unless my colleagues have further questions that I didn't get to everything here, but is there a burning one from anyone?
May I add one quick comment?
Sure.
I believe there was some talk about, Ms. Ridgeway not being afforded a chance at remediation. And in this case, there was a finding related to Ms. Ridgeway admitted that it would endanger the physical safety and mental health of a student if she were forced to come out to her mother about being in a same-sex relationship. And so we don't believe remediation would be necessary, but even if it were, if you look in the record, there is a history of multiple conference summaries and reprimands that put her on notice and established a pattern of misconduct over the years that we believe is sufficient in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And I see Ms. Ortiz shaking her head, and I think that dispute is well reflected in the record. Okay. I think that's all the questions the board has, and I'll turn it back over to President Mays.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chapa, and thank both of y'all for coming back and answering our questions. I think we're going to take a few minutes to go back into close, and it will be very respectful of the rest of our time, and then call back for open to complete.
Under 551071 and 551074, and the time is?
Yes. 1:08 a.m., 11:20. We are now back in open session, 11:20, 2020, at 1:47 a.m. I am going to make a motion on behalf of trustees, and we will see if I have a second. Having reviewed the record and the proceedings before the hearing examiner, and having heard oral argument, I move to terminate the contract of Katra Ridgeway and pursuant to Texas Education Code, Section 21.259, to issue a written decision to the parties within 10 days with findings of fact and conclusions of law, adopting, rejecting, and/or changing the independent hearing examiner's conclusions of law, and/or rejecting or changing one or more findings of fact, and the finding of fact is not supported by substantial evidence, and to include the reason and legal basis for any change or rejection consistent with the discussions in closed meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
So we've got a motion by Keisha Mays, the second by Bowie Hogg. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will vote. Dr. Reich?
Aaron Reich, I vote yes.
Mr. Wilbanks?
David Wilbanks, I vote yes.
Mr. Hogg?
Bowie Hogg, I vote yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Melody Fowler, I vote yes.
Mr. Chapa?
Justin Chapa, I vote no.
Polly Walton?
Polly Walton, I vote no.
And Keisha Mays, I vote yes. So we have 5 yeas and 2 nays. So the yeas pass. Okay? I will say, first of all, thank you for presentations on both sides. Based on this late and/or early hour, depending on how you look at it, I'm requesting that we find another time and date that would be appropriate for all to hear the grievance. So with that being said, it is 1:50 and this meeting is adjourned.